One major way of speeding things up when you're using Excel is to try and avoid use of the mouse where possible, unless it's to do one of the speedier tasks like fill handle. But one thing we could do is try and access the ribbon options via the keyboard. This then keeps you on keyboard so your hands don't have to move. And if you use a command regularly enough, you'll get to know keyboard shortcut strokes, because there'll be a number of strokes to access a particular command. To access the ribbons, first step is to press the Alt key. And what you'll notice is that every single upper level option, so up here we have File, Home, Insert, Page Layout, Formulas, Data, Review, View, Developer, and even the Quick Access toolbar, they have numbers against them. So Alt activates the shortcuts on the ribbon. If we would then, for example, want to go to the Insert ribbon, we then press N, and that jumps us to the Insert ribbon. Once we get to the Insert ribbon, what you'll then see is every other option on here has another letter against it. So Pictures have a P, Table has a T, Pivot Table has a V, Timeline, ST, Hyperlink, I, Text Box, X. Any other item from here can be accessed by typing the next letter in the sequence. If I wanted a table, I would press T, and that would bring up the Tables dialog box. Now in this particular case, with the box in place, if we just want to access the OK button, we simply press Enter on the keyboard, and that does the OK. I now have a single table on cell A1, if that's what I wanted. Alt to bring up any of the menus. H, for example, will take me back to the Home ribbon. There's a lot on the Home ribbon. Now you will notice that some items actually have two letters. For example, in the alignment section here, we have AT for align top, AM for align middle, AB for align bottom, AL align left, AC align center, AR align right. That way, if I move to a different cell and do Alt, H for home, align right, so AR. See, I've just pressed A and that leaves the ones with the prefix A. R. Now I have a cell that is right aligned. So if I type yes, it is right aligned. Now obviously you're thinking, how can that be any quicker than taking my mouse, go up there and click that icon? Well, it is once you get in the habit. So you would only use these kind of shortcuts for things that you're going to do regularly, and you get to know the keyboard shortcut, and you don't have to keep looking at the screen, because that's going to slow us down at the moment. I have to go Alt, then I have to look what letter I want. Formulas, M. That brings up formulas. Perhaps it's the name manager. Brings up the name manager. And then I've got name manager in place and I want a new name. So type N in this case. You can see in the dialog box here, N is underlined. N, create me a new name. It's picked up the text in the box and it's picked up the cell that I'm in. Okay. And I now have a new name called yes. To close this box, again, revert to my mouse and come down to close or escape. Escape always cancels out any box that you don't want to do any further action in. That's Alt, activate the shortcuts. Then you need to know the letter for the ribbon. If you want to access the quick shortcuts up here, the only ones you can use are the ones on display, and we'll be looking at the quick access toolbar shortly, because we know that there are further options in the drop list, but we can't access those through the keyboard. Alt to bring them back up, and then 2 for undo. And I get all the undo options and I can go back as far as I want. That takes away the table, even takes away the zoom. Alt 3 for redo. Come back through the zooms, but not as far as creating the table. And I'm back to where I was before I started accessing the ribbons. All you've got to remember is the Alt key. Once you've pressed the Alt key, the letters appear at that stage, and then you can click the letter that you want. R for review. If you then want to do anything on this particular ribbon, say for example new comment, I would press C. If you actually wanted to cancel all these letters being up in the air and you don't want to do anything, then it's that same shortcut for cancelling the dialog box. Escape takes us back to the previous step. Escape again takes us back to not having any letters displayed at all. Alt, R, C, new comment. The ones you use regularly, you will learn the sequence and do it so much faster than taking your mouse, clicking on the ribbon, moving down to the right icon and clicking that icon. Alt, RC gets me a new comment. This is a cell. And then I have a cell comment. Don't expect to use Excel in this way on a daily basis where you're going Alt, what letter is it? It will be quicker to use the mouse, but Alt and the letters to get the regular commands is so much faster than clicking. When working with Excel, most people will take what they're given out of the box, but sometimes you may want to turn off some of the interfaces that you're not particularly interested in or don't need for this particular book. Now, some of these interface options are easy to access and others not so easy. First set of easy ones are actually on the View ribbon. If we go to the View ribbon, you'll find here Show allows us to turn off these three, potentially four options. One is grayed out, and we'll see why shortly. One option you can turn off is the headings, and you'll see then that the column headings disappear and the row numbers disappear. That doesn't stop the cell from having its correct reference. If I click here, for example, that's H13, and I can see that in the name box. So I know where I am still, I just don't have the column headings and the row headings. Now, if I turn off the formula bar as well, formula bar disappears, and then I don't really know where I am. So depending on the use of your spreadsheet, that might be quite useful to turn the formula bar off and or the column headings. Now, one thing you can't do with the column headings is have the letters on but not the numbers, or just the numbers on and not the letters. Column headings remove both, so you lose effectively the column heading and the row heading. It's one tick and they come back. It's one tick and the formula bar comes back. One quite common thing to remove is the grid lines, so that you can't see the gaps between each cell. You know there are separate cells there, and this sometimes improves the presentation of a sheet when you're starting to use background colours and borders. But again, they can be turned on very quickly. Now the ruler is grayed out because in normal view, we don't have a ruler. If we change to page layout view, we do get a ruler and we can turn that ruler off. The page layout view is not really one of my favorite views, but it's a view that allows you to see what your spreadsheet will look like on paper, but still be able to work with it. So it's a bit of a merging option between print preview and your file, because you can still work in there. I can still put content in, I can adjust column widths, but what I can see is also how that's going to affect the page. So I've narrowed up that column and column J jumps onto this particular page. I can also add in headers very quickly without having to go into any separate dialog box. So it has its uses. And then back to normal. So these three options are accessed very quickly from here: headings, grid lines, and the formula bar. Other items that you can turn on or off are accessed through File, Options, Advanced. Scroll down until we see the section that says Display. In here you can see Show Formula Bar, so I can actually turn that on or off from in here. You can even turn off the screen tips, so that when you're typing a function, you don't get the little, let's give you a tip about what the parameters are for this function. We can turn off the horizontal scroll bar, that's little bar here, vertical scroll bar, little bar here. So those are controlled independently. The sheet tabs can be turned off. Row and column headings are controlled from here. We can show formulas in the cell instead of the result. We can show a sheet from right to left. Fairly useful if you're Arabic based. You can now go from A all the way to the left hand side and the numbers go down, and the sheet tabs start building from the right as well. So if I add a new tab here, notice how it reverts, because tab blank has been told to be right to left, but sheet 2 hasn't. I'd need to go back into the options, advanced, scroll down, show sheet right to left, because we're display options for this worksheet, or we can change that to blank, show right to left, and that will go right to left as well. Then both sheets are right to left. Back to options, return that to left to right. It's all in the advanced. You can see we have a display section, and that controls display of a number of items such as the formula bar and the screen tips. Then we have control display options for this workbook, and you can change that to any other open workbook. Anything you do here will only affect the current workbook. Anything you do here will affect Excel. So if I open a new file, it won't have the formula bar if I've turned it off. Anything you do here will only affect the current sheet or another sheet within your file. And in here we can turn the row and column headers off, showing the sheet right to left instead of left to right, show page breaks, show zero in cells that have a zero value, show outline symbols if an outline is applied, show grid lines. So I turn these off on a sheet by sheet basis, and I can even change the grid line color. I could change the grid line colors to orange. That will only affect this sheet, sheet 2, which is still showing right to left, goes back to the default gray. So you've got to be a little bit careful when you're in here in the advanced that the things that you're changing, are they affecting the whole of Excel, just this workbook, or just this worksheet? So the right to left option is just the worksheet. The color of the grid lines is just the worksheet. So each sheet could have a different set of colored grid lines. So that's just customizing interface options. The beauty of Excel is that it's customized completely to you and you are in charge of that interface. Adding formulas to cells is really quite straightforward, and I'm sure you possibly will have tried it in the past. If not, you can have a go now. I'm going to take the mortgage function sheet to do this. If you go to review, you'll see there's an option here for new comment. Now you need to make sure you're on the cell that you'd like to add a comment to. So I'm on this one here, new comment. Box pops up. In bold is my username. So whoever you're logged in as, you don't have to retain that. You can remove it or you can replace it. I'm going to put Guy. This is the monthly mortgage payment. Click away. And then depending on the settings, your comment will either stay or it will disappear. Mine are currently set to show. It says here, show all comments. If I take that tick off, it disappears. Put it back on, comes back again. With them fixed, I can actually move them, but the arrow will remain pointing at the correct cell. So it doesn't matter how far away I move, the arrow remains. So I can move it back again. I can even resize it so it's a different shape. Maybe move it somewhere more logical. Or I can say don't show. However, even when you're not showing the comments, you still get a little red triangle in the top right hand corner to indicate that there is a comment on that cell. And if I hover, the comment then appears as a pop-up. So I can choose to have them fixed at all times, so that's show all comments, not fixed but visible via the red little triangle, in which case I hover and they pop. Now that's fine and it works great and I can add as many comments as I like. At times you may wish to add a comment to a formula but not have some kind of indicator on the screen, whether that be a little box because you're showing them all or even a red little triangle. Now we can do that cleverly. Let's delete the comment that's there by clicking on the cell and choosing delete. Now that comment has gone, but I still want to add a comment to this cell for either myself in the future or someone else who's using the formula. I simply do that by clicking into the cell. The formula remains the same, there's nothing going to change with that, but then I add on the end of it a little note, which is the n function, n, open brackets. It actually converts text to numbers and numbers to text, but if I just put a comment in speech marks, it will just keep that comment within the cell. So n, open brackets, speech marks. This is the monthly repayment value. So using this clever little option of an n, you can hide comments within formulas because it's not displayed here in the cell. The only way to know it's there is by looking in the formula bar at the top here. But we can hide that comment in there, and anyone who's just using the sheet to work things out is not likely to then go around and interrogate the formulas. Anyone who needs to know what's going on would have a look at the formula, would have a look at the contents up here, and then this comment could be quite helpful to them. We might use it a bit more than just to say this is the monthly repayment value. We might use it to actually explain each of the three components. Why are we dividing by 12? Because we're on a monthly interest rate, not the annual interest rate. Why are we multiplying by 12 on the B4? Because we need to turn the number of years into number of months. So we could put all of that inside the comment, hidden away here in the formula, but not affecting the formula's result. We do that by just adding that plus n, open brackets, open speech marks, comment, close speech marks, close brackets. So I could add one to here, for example, plus n, the LTV is the loan to value, thus explaining the abbreviation. And again, it's not visible on the sheet. It's only there if you look into the formula itself. Now we're about to do something that you're probably never going to actually need to do, but it is quite fun and the ability to do it could prove quite useful to you. What we want to do is put a formula or the result of a formula into one of these caption boxes. So we have here someone really thinking hard. The computer asks, what is the volume of this sphere? There's our sphere. She says this is so hard, and what we could do is perhaps either let the computer tell her what the result is, or she has a eureka moment and tells us what the result is. So the first step is to actually insert another caption box. So insert shape and a little call out. We'll put that down here. Point that there so we know she's saying it. But what is she going to say? Well, we need to calculate the actual volume of that sphere. So let's do that in this cell down here. Now the volume of a sphere is the area of the circle at the end here times the height. Area of the circle is pi radius squared. Well, we know the diameter. So we need to say equals pi, which is a function within Excel. If you didn't know that, you've just learned another one. So pi, open and close brackets. So that's going to produce the value of pi. We don't need to give it any parameters. Multiplied by, that's the radius squared, which is 2 to the power of 2. And then that's multiplied by 8. So our volume of this sphere is actually just over 100 cubic inches. So I want that result to be in this text box here. So if I go into there and make sure that contains a text box, by going to Drawing Tools Format Text Box and click, we now have a text box here. And what I can actually do is tell this text box to be equal to the value in that cell there. By being in the text box, going up to the formula bar, clicking an equals, nothing happens without an equal sign, and this cell here. And return, and you'll see the value then appears in here. Appears in here with all the decimal places because it's not formatted. So let's go back to here and adjust this. And use the text function around it to display just 2 decimal places. And we see our text box responds. And what you can't do, unfortunately, is put this whole formula into the formula bar within there because it doesn't quite happily work with that for whatever reason. But we can tell it to look at an existing cell, as well as being able to put the result in. Let's put some text in that she might say, Eureka! I now know it is, concatenate the result, and then concatenate after that, cubic inches. Return, and then that appears in our text box. Now we can format the text box just as we can any other text, even though it's been driven by a formula. We don't need it to be so large. Eureka, I now know it is 100.53 cubic inches. Now I can also see that in this formula here. So I will just hide that row. So you can make the results of formulas appear in text boxes, which means you can have them floating around the screen. However, they can only equal another cell. So all the work has to be done on the sheet. So actually physically in your worksheet, I've then hidden that cell and just told this particular text box by going to the formula bar to be equal to the result of D21. I then hide D21 from view and this result works. And it physically is calculating this. I know now it is 100.53 cubic inches. Because if we were to unhide that and change the formula, let's say it's 9 inches long, the result changes there, and we then hide that. Hopefully you will see some uses for that. If not, it can be quite fun just to have little caption boxes telling you the result. You know, this month's sales are. The average consumption per mile is. Whatever you want that cell to equal, it must just equal the contents of a cell, and then that cell is the one that does all the calculation, whether that's some mathematical calculation or whether that's some concatenation. In our particular example, we've managed to use both. Hyperlinks, everybody's used to them now on the internet. Click and it takes you somewhere. Probably not things that you would expect to see or even think about using in Excel. Well, we can add hyperlinks to any object you might have on an Excel spreadsheet. Here we have in our objects file a little Bugatti car, smiley face, and an arrow. Now, if we want to make the Bugatti car hyperlink to the Bugatti website, then we simply right-click, hyperlink, and we can choose existing file or web page, place in this document, create a new document, or an email address. I'd like this to go to a website. So it's http://bugatti.com, or I could paste an address in here if I'd copied one onto my clipboard and then just paste it into here. When I click away, this now becomes a hyperlink that I can then click on. You can see when you hover, it says the address. And when I click, it will then start my browser and take me to bugatti.com. Now we don't need to just hyperlink to the web. We can hyperlink perhaps to another location in this document, which could be quite useful for navigation. This arrow, for example, I might want that to jump me from here to this sheet here that contains my data, which should save me clicking on that tab, or if that tab was hidden, then I wouldn't be able to do that. so we can have a hyperlink, so we can create a hyperlink navigation system. To do that, right click, hyperlink. I need to go to a place in this document. Now the place in this document must either be a cell reference or a named reference, and we've actually called the top left hand cell of that sheet my data. Okay, and when I click away, I can click back on and we can see it jumps through to A1 in my data, which happens to be my data. So I added a new sheet and called it more data 2013. Got a little bit of information in here, 2013, large number as money. And then we'll just give this cell here a name. So click into the name box, call it year data. Remember that names cannot have spaces in. Return to accept the name, then back to objects, and we'll make the smiley face go to more data value. Right click, hyperlink, place in this document, and you can see the names then appear in the defined names list. Or we can choose sheet tabs for more data. So if I want to go to a specific point, I could use my named reference. If I just say, let's go to that sheet, then I can use the sheet name. So let's go to year data. Okay. Click away to effectively leave the editing, and then I've got a hand, tells me I'm going to there. Those are hyperlinks, not something you would normally expect in Excel, but it can be quite useful. We've seen we've added one to an external website, but the more useful ones are the ones going internally to other parts of this same workbook. If I need to remove a hyperlink, I simply right-click the object that contains the hyperlink, and I have three options now. Editing the hyperlink if it's going to the wrong place, open the hyperlink, which is the same as clicking, or removing the hyperlink. So if I don't want it anymore, I simply click remove. It then gets taken off the object, and the object now doesn't have a hand over it when I hover, but it's not a clickable item. But right clicking takes me then to the hyperlink option. So we can add hyperlinks to any object that you add to a spreadsheet to jump to an external web page, an internal point within your workbook, be that a worksheet or a named cell or named range. And we can even link through to email addresses. I could put the email address in, training@nybytes.co.uk, subject, testing Excel, smiley face, and then OK. Click away to deactivate, and then click on. You'll see that that will start my default email program, which is asking me what it should use. I think you should use Outlook, please. And then an empty email will start with the correct email address, with the subject I placed. All I would then need to do is type a body message and press send. Hi, it's me. Send. So hopefully you'll see some kind of use for these hyperlink options. Very easy to add, and very easy then to say where they're going: an external website, an email address, or an internal point within this workbook. One thing that you have to be extremely careful of when printing in Excel is how many pieces of paper you're going to use. One thing that Excel does not come with is predefined paper size. It's a massive spreadsheet. It in fact has 17,179,869,184 cells. Depending on how wide you make those cells, how high you make those cells, you could be using thousands upon thousands of sheets of paper. So one thing to always check before you ever print in Excel is print preview. Now, when you firstly go to the print dialog box in 2013, it now includes all the print settings and print preview. And here we see how many pages we're going to need. But we can still control that. We have full control over the page settings. Now really, in order to do this, there are two main tools. Let's just escape to go back to the document. The first of those tools is to change the view to page break preview. View, page break preview, and then we can see how many pages are being used and really how that distribution is taking place. So although there are 12 pages in use, 12th, 11th and 10th page over here are not that well used because they only have 3 columns in them. In fact, 2 of the columns have no data. So we could do a little bit about that. So that's the first of your tools. In Page Break Preview, you can actually move the page breaks. If I wanted to move my page breaks over, I could move that one over to include Town City, and I could move that one over to include these other columns. And then you see we now have, that's page 1, that's page 2. And between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, there's not much data going on there. So I could actually drag that down to the bottom. And we're now forcing the data to fit onto 2 sheets of paper. Now on the screen that doesn't look too bad, but if we go back to print, preview, we see that that's quite squashed up. It fits, but it is a bit squishy. It might not be that legible because we've had to squash that much data, which was 12 sheets, down into 2 sheets, but it is achievable. So that's escape. So that's page break preview, first of the useful tools. The other, which is extremely useful if I return back to normal, and notice that in normal, you can't tell that you're squashing this lot into 2 pages. It's just an area that you're now working with. But back in normal, we can make use of the print area. Now the print area is vitally important. If someone comes to your spreadsheet and is being frightfully mean, really, and scrolls down into an area that has not been used at all and makes an entry, Harry the Spider, that will now activate a wider area of your sheet. And when we go to File and Print, we see that even though we're using this massively squashed zoom, we've now gone up to 5 pages, of which 3 and 4 are empty, and then Harry the Spider is written nice and tiny on page 5. Now you can get around that problem, or you can get around a similar problem of avoiding data that you don't want by using a print area. Let's go back to the beginning and set our print area. Now to set the print area, we need to go to the Page Layout ribbon. We need to highlight the data that we would want to print. I'm actually going to miss out that end column because it has no entries, and come all the way down to the last actual person. So I'm avoiding that empty row at the bottom that sort of has a little bit of minimal data in. So that's the area I would like to print. We then go to Page Layout, Print Area, Set Print Area. And now it will only ever want to print when I go to print the area that we've highlighted, which is still being squashed into 2, but it's a much smaller area. I don't have the issue of Harry the Spider. Now there are other tools that we can use. We can increase the margins. If I view the margins here, I can adjust them in the preview. I can sometimes look at changing the orientation as a way of improving the layout. That also can be done here from the print dialog box. And we see that the orientation actually makes things worse. So let's go back to portrait. I can adjust the scaling from here by going into page setup. It's squashed into 46% of its original size because of me adjusting manually the page breaks. So let's go back up to 100. Otherwise our document will not be that legible. But even at 100%, we can then do a little bit of tweaking. You can see that it's just gone over. So now we're back at 100%. Let's go back to View, Page Break Preview, and let's make small adjustments rather than those big adjustments. One of the adjustments I might make now that I've gone back to normal zoom is to change back to landscape. And there we see there is 1 column missing. Now with 1 column, I can just drag that page break and things will then fit on less pages. Again, always into print to see the preview. Not too bad. Could perhaps have a little play to lose those extra rows there, but then it starts to get smaller and smaller. So it's getting the balance right between the size of the text and the number of pieces of paper that you want to print out. The 2 biggest controllers here that will help you is the print area, so that you're only printing what you tell it to print, and the page break preview, where you can manually adjust where the page breaks occur. I would be a little bit careful about going too advanced with that, as we did, because text got too small, but certainly very good for adjusting the odd column. There's 2 little options there for helping improve when you come to print Excel spreadsheets. Over the years of Microsoft Excel, the number of initial worksheets you get in a new workbook has varied. Originally it was 8, then they reduced it to 3. Now, in 2013, you are in charge of how many blank worksheets you get in a new workbook. We make this control under File, Options, on the General tab, and you'll see here, when creating new workbooks, not only can you control the default font, font size, and the default view, doing normal page break and page layout. So should you wish to drop straight into page break preview or page layout view, you can do that, and include how many sheets. You can see here I have mine set to 1, but we could increase that to 3, to 4, to 5, 6, 7, let's say 3. And when we say OK and start a new book, File New, blank workbook. We are given 3 sheets, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, because that's the options we changed it to. So it's File, Options, General, and in here. If you prefer 1, or you always want to have 6, or you always want to have 12, you can make that change in here. Now, once you've got your workbook and you want additional sheets, then we can do that either through right-click on the sheet here, Insert, choose a worksheet, and OK. And a new worksheet will appear to the left of the one you were in. Notice it gets numbered sheet 4. Alternatively, you can go to the Home ribbon, Insert, Insert Sheet, and you will not be asked what kind of sheet. It will assume a new worksheet, and that again appears to the left of the sheet that you're in and gets the next number, in this case sheet 5. Now we know we can access these options through the keyboard. Alt, H for the Home ribbon, I for Insert, S for Sheet, and we get a new sheet. Now there is actually a quicker keyboard shortcut than Alt, H, I, S, although if you did it regularly you would get the pattern there. Alternatively, we can just do Shift F11 and that will also insert a new sheet for you. Again, appearing to the left of the sheet you're currently in. That's Shift F11 quick keyboard shortcut, right click, Insert, choose Worksheet, OK, it's a bit long-winded, or Insert from the Home ribbon, which we know we can do with Alt HIS. You can see here when you hover, it gives you the keyboard shortcut anyway. I hover a bit longer, there we are, Shift and F11. Those are your options for inserting more sheets. If you need to copy a sheet, we simply grab it down here with the mouse, hold down the Control key and move to the right, letting go of the mouse, then replicates that current sheet. If it's empty, I've just got another blank sheet, and you'll see it always puts a little 2 in brackets. If I need to replicate a number of sheets, then I can Control click, make the selection, then hold down with the mouse to grab them, and you can see the icon is multiple leaps. Hold down the Control key, I get a little plus in there, and just move to the right and let go of the mouse first, and I get all of those sheets replicated. So actually getting more worksheets isn't that difficult. So the initial setting really is to suit you for new workbooks. That's why you saw at the beginning, I have mine set for 1. I only need 1 worksheet in a workbook. If I need any more, I'll get some. Shift F11, Alt HIS, Insert from the Home ribbon, right click on a sheet tab, or just replicate existing worksheets so that I can get more. If you recall nothing or take nothing or use nothing from the whole of this title, then this bit you will use for the rest of your Excel careers. It's the quickest way to create a chart in Excel. Let's take our sales data 2013 file. Now we can pick on any one of the months, it doesn't matter. Let's pick on May, for example. And if I would like a quick chart based on this May data, all I simply need to do is effectively place my cursor anywhere in the data. I don't need to be at the beginning, I don't need to be at the end, I don't need to be in the middle, I can be anywhere. And then I need to execute the keyboard shortcut F11. And hey presto, a default chart appears in a new tab. So you can see here it says chart 2. So I was in May and I've now got a chart to the left of it based on all the data in May. So we can see car sold, plane sold, bike sold, helicopter sold, all the way through to total sold. Now it uses the default chart type, which if you haven't played with any of the settings is the column chart in Excel. But if you've changed your default chart type, you will have a different chart that appears when you do F11. There is one slight drawback to it, and that it's graphed everything that was in that data set. So it's done the total sold, which then effectively makes each of the separate items quite small. If instead we highlighted what we wanted to be graphed, so that's not the totals, just the region names, the item names, and then the numbers, and then do my F11, then we get a much more presentable chart. It's still using the same default chart. It still creates a new tab, now called chart 3, but it's only charting the items we had highlighted. So I've got a separate column for each of the regions, north, south, east, and west, and then a separate little area on the chart for each of my items that I've been selling. Obviously, the orange bar is quite big in each of these, but the car sold is quite a small orange bar. As you hover over any of the columns, it tells you which bit you've got. So we're using the south as the series, the point is the bike sold, and the value to get that height is 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you have a chart, the chart tools ribbons appear. So we have chart tools design and format, and we could even do a quick switch here, switch row and column, so that each of the bars is now the items, and the little area on the chart is each of the regions. Depending on what you're trying to compare, that can be a quick way of just swapping the chart around. And we see that the south region has really sold a lot more caravans. Or we switch it back over, and we're then comparing the items, so then we can compare regions of items. South have done better with caravans. Switched over, you then look at the south overall, and the caravans being the highest still stands true. So that's a quick switch using the switch row and column, but the quickest shortcut here is that F11. If you're happy that all the data gets mapped, don't highlight anything. Just click in F11, you'll get your chart. If you don't want the total as we didn't, then you would need to highlight before you did your F11. Now what would be really great is if you could multiple select, as we've seen already how to do, highlight the data, and then use our keyboard shortcut. However, what you'll find is you cannot. A new chart cannot be created with multiple sheets are selected. A chart must be created for each sheet separately. Perhaps that would be an improvement for future versions of Excel. So each of these sheets then has to have its own chart created. But what we could do, and we have done, is select them all and highlight so that when I go back in, they're already highlighted. And then I just need to do a quick F11 to get my chart. You'll also find with an area selected, you'll get a little pop out here from which you can choose charts, and then we get a choice of quick charts. Now these quick charts are created as objects in the same sheet. They can be deleted if you don't want them. Click charts, and then if you hover over each of the types, so you then get choice of the four main recommended types: stacked bar, clustered column, or a stacked column. And the stacked column does look quite nice because it's one column for each of the items, and then the colored blocks within it are each of the regions. So I could use a stacked column and then switch the rows and columns, so each column then becomes a region with each of the color blocks representing sales of each item. So there are lots of choices and lots of very quick choices. Just remember the F11 for a quick graph. Even if you don't remember the F11, just delete that. You can highlight and use the recommended pop out, so that's charts, and choose one of the recommended options. And then once you have a graph, we can switch the row and column data very quickly to see if that effectively presents the information in a better light. Do not forget F11. We've already seen the fill handle in action during this particular short title in how it can replicate data and make lists very, very quickly, but it also has the ability to replicate what are referred to as custom lists. Now there are some already in existence in your Excel, and you may already have used them. If you were to type any month of the year, let's pick on March for example, and take your little fill handle, it will replicate the rest of the months of the year, and in fact, when it gets to December, start again. That's a predefined custom list starting in January to December, and it will work from whichever month you start at. So I could start at September and I could drag to the right. I could start at February and I could drag upwards, and you'll see that it will go backwards through the months. So that's already in, and it will work with full months of the year as we have there, or abbreviated ones. I could put Feb, and it will replicate Feb forwards, so that's down and to the right. But if we go up, it replicates backwards, and if we go to the left, it replicates backwards. Remember the one drawback of the fill handle: if you drag it over the top of other cells that already have content, it doesn't tell you, it just replaces the content of those cells. Notice also here with these custom lists that it matches the style that you've typed in. So I typed Feb totally lowercase, replication was for then every month to be totally lowercase. If I go for Feb totally uppercase, it then replicates totally uppercase. So depending on how you start is then how it replicates through. Notice there when I chose May, now May is the same shorthand as it is longhand. So when I've gone for May and tried to replicate, it's assumed the longhand. So it said, oh yeah, May, June, July, August, September, not May, June, Jul, Aug, Sep. Whereas all of the other months that are longer than 3 letters will always then stay in the shorthand version. So that's the months of the year. It does exactly the same for days of the week, both shorthand and longhand. So if I started with Thursday and replicated downwards, you wouldn't be surprised to see Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and round it goes. And the game in the shorthand. Let's do wed, totally lowercase. And you see again, it stays totally lowercase and retains the abbreviated format wed, the, free, sat, sun, mun. Just as the months of the year, to the right will go forwards, to the left will go backwards, and upwards will go backwards also. So these are already in. You don't have to do anything to use these. They're just there. You just type any day of the week, any month of the year in shorthand or longhand, and it will then repeat that pattern as you drag the fill handle for as long as you feel like dragging it. What about adding your own lists? So if we go to my list on the fill handle working file, I've already entered 2 potential lists that could be quite useful having on little fill handles. So all I would need to type whenever I need to the north, south, east and west is any one of these, grab the fill handle and it would do the others. At the moment it wouldn't. If I went now, it would just replicate the one cell, north. What I want to do then is take those 4 and create my own custom list from them. So with them highlighted, we go to File, Options, Advanced, scroll, quite a way scroll until you see a grey button. There we are, near the bottom in fact, Edit Custom Lists. One little click takes us where we want to be, which is the Custom Lists section. Here you can see the days of the week and the months of the year are already in there as custom lists. We want to add our own. Well, because I highlighted these before I went into this box, they're already here in this little section here that says press enter to separate list entries, import the list from cells A4 to A7, A4 to A7. All I need to do is click import. And north, south, east and west are then added in to my list. You can see them here on the left hand side. If I then want to add this other list, rather than coming back out of this box and going all the way in, because it is a few clicks, File, Options, Advance, scroll, I can do it while I'm here and just go click the browse button, highlight those options, come back in and import. And then it imports warehousing, personnel, admin, clerical, sales and operations. That's added to the list. So I've now got 6 custom lists. There's no limit, you can have as many as you like. If you have a set of terms that could be quite useful because you want to repeat them regularly, either as column or row headings, get them in the system as a custom list. The whole point of this particular title is to shortcut you to make Excel that much faster, and this is one way of making it that much faster. So if I then say OK, and OK to come out of the options box, I can try these out. So I could try any one of my departments. Let's try sales. Go for the fill handle, drag down, and you'll see it goes through the list forwards. So it goes to operations next, then jumps to warehousing, personal, admin, clerical, and then comes back to sales. Notice, just like the days of the week, it matches the case that I used. So I went totally lowercase, it stays totally lowercase. Perhaps I want headings. Let's put north. Grab the fill handle, drag to the right, and it goes and does the other 3, south, east and west, in the same case that I used with the first one. So with an uppercase, so it stayed in uppercase. So it replicates the case that you start with, and then it takes the text values from your custom lists. If it can't see them, it just copies the content of the cell. These custom lists are great for shortcutting headings. Particularly in a company, you might use people's names, department headings, whatever you regularly are typing in as column headings or row headings could benefit from being a custom list inside your Excel. It's just remembering where to go. File, Options, Advanced, all the way pretty much to the bottom. Edit custom lists, and you're into the correct dialog box. At that point, you can then browse to pick up the cells that have already got the values in, which is much quicker than actually typing them all in here one at a time, because you know you've got them and they're spelt correctly before you add them. If at some point you no longer require a custom list, or it's spelt wrong, or there is an issue with it, you can come into this same dialog box, select the list, click delete, are you sure? And the list is removed from your custom lists. It doesn't remove any text from any sheets at all. It just takes away the ability to now replicate that list by dragging the fill handle. Let's remove north, south, east and west as well. Delete. Are you sure? OK. And that one's gone too. So now when I come out and pick a cell, it just copies rather than going through my little clever custom list, because my clever little custom list is no longer there. In Excel, it is quite easy to create formats such as we have here in this sales data file that look like little mini tables. That's a slight difference to telling Excel that we are dealing with a table. Now we have a number of ways of telling Excel that a set of data is a table. And the first is to just use the keyboard shortcut, Ctrl+T, and that will bring up the Create Table dialog box. Now you'll notice it highlights what it thinks is the data, which is this set of information here, and asks if my table has headers. I'm going to cancel that for the moment. Another way of effectively creating this into a little table is to actually just go to the home ribbon and say format as table. Choose one of the table formats that you like the look of. But then the first step before it even thinks about formatting is to create a table. It pops up very similar box that we saw. That one said create table, this one says format as a table, and it highlights the same cells where it thinks the data is. We're going to cancel that as well, and then look at the third option, which is to go to the insert ribbon and choose table. And again, it highlights the cells that it thinks are the table. Now I'm going to say cancel, and instead of letting Excel decide where the table is, I'm going to highlight the cells that are effectively my table cells, which is not the January sales corp heading at the top. It is all the column headings for each of the values and the row headings, including the total row. Then I'm going to go to insert table, and it now has my range. When I create a table from it by saying OK, each of my table headings now have little column drop downs, so auto filters already in place. I also suddenly get a Table Tools Design context sensitive ribbon, which is not there if I click outside the table. And now that I have a table, I can control some of the formatting. I can choose a different style, and that will control the style of my table. I can choose whether from the styles I want to use the header row pattern or not, banded rows, total row to be a different format. So you can see it puts that underneath it because my table actually includes the total row rather than it being placed below. For this particular table, I can't use the total row because I already have one. First column being different, the last column being different, and then banded columns, only if the style I choose has them. If I choose this one here that has banded columns as well as rows, then the banded columns is in place. But I can always turn that off so it doesn't use them. And whether the filter button is there or not. So you saw it arrive by default, but I can then turn that off. Having a table also allows me other options such as refreshing the data if it's an external set of data, exporting the data, so I can export that to a SharePoint list, inserting a slicer, summarizing this table with a pivot table, removing any duplicates, or converting it back to a range of cells. So effectively takes it out of this table format into cells format, which means I can then format each of the cells separately as just normal cells on my sheet. That's how to turn a set of data into a table, which then will have its own ribbon for you to choose or activate, deactivate options that you like. You may have seen in action in Excel little drop lists that allow you to pick from available data to enter some value into a cell. If we take in our employees list file, we're going to use this to add some drop lists that will make data entry a little easier. Where you have possible repeated values, like the county, for example, a lot of people live in the same county, and the department, lots of people work for the same department, then the entry of these must be spelled correctly for any data analysis to work. In order to safeguard that the typing is the same, we can offer a little drop list so people choose from the drop list. The first thing we need before we can create drop lists are the unique entries ready. We have those here in list data. We have the counties listed and we have the departments listed. So back in our employees sheet where we have our counties, I would like to change all of these to little drop lists. In order to do that, we need to select all the cells. Then we go to data, data validation. So the group heading is the same as the option we're choosing. Here we have the validation criteria, and from here we choose list. So those are the steps involved in taking us to the right location. You then need to tell Excel where is the list of information you want to provide as a list. So we use the browse option, go to our list data and highlight the counties but without the heading. Otherwise the word county would be offered as an option. Then we click the browse back option. There's our source. It's going to be a list. We want to ignore any blanks and offer an in cell drop down. Okay. When you then check each cell, you'll find it has a little drop down arrow allowing you to choose different county to the one already pre-entered. So I could move that to Teesside if I wanted. West Yorkshire is chosen, but I can move it to County Durham. The little drop list is then available. Before we do the second drop list, which is for the departments, we're going to make this slightly easier for us by going to the list data and naming our department range. We highlight the department values, In the name box here, I'm going to put DEPT. Return to finish the naming convention. Names of ranges cannot have spaces in them. Then we can go back to our employees, highlight all the departments, go to data validation on the data ribbon, data validation. It is also going to be a list, but here in the source, I simply need to type equals DEPT, which is the named range I created. So I don't have to go and do any browsing. I just need to insert the named range. Okay. And then when I check each of the cells, they all have a drop list. And that drop list is looking at our list of departments, selecting obviously the one that is already entered. Accounts, I can move Richard here from operations into warehousing, but I can only choose an option from the list. If I were to try and type in an extra option that is not there, such as administration, and then leave that cell, I get an error. Value entered is not valid. It uses restricted values that can be entered into this cell. We could retry, so we could retry admin, but that's not going to work. I'm going to click cancel, and it goes back to its original value. So the pick list is not only facilitating that data entry, it's safeguarding the contents of the cell. What about if you wanted to add values to your pick list? Well, in the list data, we just need to insert further values. Now I cannot add them at the end because it won't get picked up. I need to insert them in the middle with the county. However, with the named range, which is this one here, I can add them at the end. I could add admin and I could add marketing. There's two extra options to my range, but what I would need to do is to change the named range. So I go to formulas, name manager. My DEPT is looking at cells C2 to C8. What I need to do is effectively change that 8 to a 10 and click the little tick. And then I've now expanded my named range without having to go in and adjust the pick list at all. Come back in here. Because the named range is expanded, my pick list is now seeing the new two options of admin and marketing. So using a named range is preferable for your pick list options because you can adjust the named range so much more easily, which then has a knock-on effect to the values available in your pick list. Custom views are rarely used in Excel from what I've seen from people's work, but they are excellent really. Now we don't really have the time to go into depth with custom views, but I'd just like to show you how to create them, how useful they can be. Now what a custom view is another view of the same sheet. Here if we take our employees file for example, and if I then wanted to create a slightly different view where I've hidden some columns or added some filtering, then I could do that, but I'd need to be able to go back to seeing everybody. So the steps really are to create a view of everything I can see. So we go to view on the ribbons, custom views. I currently have no custom views, but I would like to add one. The custom view name is going to be whole view because I can see everything at the moment. And that's going to include any print settings I might have and any hidden rows, columns and filter settings. Okay. If I then add on filtering, data filter, and let's say we want to filter out so we only see all the men, remove 2 and then all singles. So remove everyone else but the sins. I'm now looking at male singles. I'm not really interested in this address information, so let's hide the main parts of the address. And I've effectively chopped down the spreadsheet, but without creating a new one. So I still have the same spreadsheet, employees, but I've filtered away some of the data and I've hidden some of the columns. What we then do is we save this as another view. So we go back to view, custom views. I can see my whole view is still there, and I add a new view, which is male singles. Going to include print settings and any hidden rows, views, columns, and filter settings. Okay. What I then do is I can go back to custom views and move between my two views. I do whole view show. You can see everybody comes back. Custom views, male single show, and then it's applying all the filtering settings and the hidden columns. That hopefully is enough to whet your appetite for you to think, hey, this would be quite good to be using. Let's add a third view just to prove how useful it can be. So let's firstly change back to whole view, and we'll add in some filtering. This time let's see all females, so that's 2. that are married. They must work in accounts or clerical. I'm also not interested in a lot of the columns, like all the address information, telephone, fax. Let's hide those. Keep the email, date of birth, salary, accounts. I'm not interested in these two end columns. They're empty anyway, so we'll hide those as well. So we go to View, Custom Views. I want to add this as a third custom view, female mar admin. So females that are married and work in an admin department. So that's clerical and accounts covered with one word. Okay. And then I can now jump very quickly between all three of these. Custom views, all view, show, custom views, male singles, custom views, female mar admin. Notice this time that instead of single clicking and show, I'm just double clicking, and that's the same, pops it back into view. You'll also see that from the custom view dialog box, we can delete any views we no longer require, or we can go and add in more, or we can close the dialog box should we not want to change the view we're currently looking at. Now, if you like them and you think they are clever, we can make accessing the custom views just that little bit quicker. At the moment, you need to go to the view ribbon, custom views, choose the one you want, and then show. We have reduced that to a double click here. That's only two singles and a double click. If you do use them, then we can make things a lot faster by actually adding a drop list of your views to the quick access toolbar, so they will be available up here. How do we do that, Guy? Firstly, we need to go to more commands on the quick access toolbar. The command that we're looking for, this little drop list of your views, is actually hidden away. It's in the section where it says commands not in the ribbon. And then we need to scroll through this long list, they're alphabetical, to custom views. Now what I would like to do is add this to the quick access toolbar. Now if you're only using custom views in one particular workbook, then just add it to that workbook. The custom views can be added to the employees workbook. Okay, and you see it then appears up here, and I can see the view I'm currently using, which is male singles. What about whole view? We're now down to a single click. Choose the list, choose the item, and you then have the view applied. So there's a combination of work there, creating the custom views, making sure that you save a view that is everything unaltered, and then we can add the custom view drop down option to the quick access toolbar so that you can then jump from one of those views to another very quickly. Let's take our working file CTRL shortcuts to examine all of the control keyboard shortcuts that exist in Microsoft Excel. There are 26 letters in the alphabet. Using the control key plus one of those letters will activate a shortcut that will save you some time. Some of the keyboard shortcuts are better than others, some of them more easy to remember than others, but we're going to run through the 26 that are attached to the control key. Now the first thing is Control J and Control M are still currently unassigned in Microsoft Excel. The other 24 letters, however, do something. Control A, for example. If you do Control A, it will highlight everything. Now, by everything, for example, if I click into this little data set here, we mean the surrounding data. So if I do Control A, it highlights the data. If I keep that selected and do Control A again, then it highlights the whole sheet. It has a sort of two-step process. One is to select the cells around it, and then the next step is to select the whole sheet. If I click in here where my keyboard shortcuts are and do Control A, it selects all the cells that are around it that would effectively form a small range. The second Control A that follows on would then highlight the whole sheet. So that's Control A, highlights all. A for all, very easy. Control B, well that simply applies emboldening. You can see there the B has gone bold. Now it's an on-off switch, so Control B again turns it off. On and off. So it's not a double step like the Control A. It's a single on or a single off. Bold. Control C for copy. Now in Excel, you know when you've copied a cell or a number of cells, so let's highlight all of our numbers and do Control C, because you get little marching ants around the item. So Control C is copy. So I can come over here and put copy. Now notice as soon as you go ahead and do another action, the copying command is forgotten. the little ants have disappeared. So you'd need to come back and Control C again. And then if I want to paste them underneath here, I can actually just press enter if I just want to paste once. And it says that down here in the status bar. Select destination and press enter. If, however, I want to paste and then paste and then paste and then paste, I need to use the paste command, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Control V. So we can go paste and paste, we can paste, and we can continue pasting until either you press enter as the last paste or you press escape to cancel your marching ants. So Control V is actually paste. Now that's not quite as easy to remember as Control C, because C is copy. However, if we do one of the others in the family, which is X, X is cut. If I take that bottom row and Control X, it looks like it's copying because I get my little marching ants. If I then move down a number of rows and Control V, you'll see that it's actually moved. It's cut and then Control V for paste. Now the cut is a little bit more obvious with the X, because X is like a pair of scissors, which sort of leaves the paste still out on the tree a little. If you look at your keyboard, and it's a normal QWERTY keyboard, X, C and the V are all next to each other along the bottom row, so they're in the same family. X for cut, C for copy, V for paste. Let's go back up for D. Control D is a clever little one because it's ditto. If you do Control D, it will copy the contents of the cell above. So here I've got the word copy copied down. It's actually going to carry out a ditto. Now it only works from the cell above it. If I do it on an empty cell with nothing above it, then you get nothing. But if I do it here, I'll get 2, 3, 4 effectively copied down from the cell above. Control E is very clever and really only new to this version of Excel. And this is the flash fill. Now we will see the flash fill in action later on. As a demonstration, here in the second sheet, EMPS, I've got a column here after the surname column that we'll call full name, with an example of how I want the full name to appear, Mrs. W. Parker. So what I would like to do is go down this column and go Mr. M. De Silva. Well, that's very achievable with flash fill, and our keyboard shortcut is Control E. So I simply go into the cell below Mrs. W. Parker, do Control E, and it flash fills the rest of the column. And they'll all be in the same pattern you'll see. Miss S. Glover, Miss S. Glover. That's flash fill. We will see it in action later on, but the keyboard shortcut to make it work is Control E. Control F, nice and easy. It's the letter find. So I can search my file, let's say for the number 55, and it finds 55. Control G, another nice logical one for go to. I could go anywhere in my sheet. I can go to N24. And it jumps me to N24. Control H for replace. So it's a find and replace. Find the 55, that's what I last typed in the find box, and replace it with 78. I could do replace all, and all the 55s on the sheet have now been replaced with 78. There were 4 of them. Okay, thank you. Control I, another logical one, italics. If I do that on that cell now, the word italics goes into italics. J is currently unassigned. Control K is a hyperlink. I can then, as we've seen previously, link to an existing file, place in this document, a new document, or an email address. Cancel and type hyperlink in there. Control L creates a little table. You can see Control L where I am tries to make a table out of the data there. Says where's the data for your table? Does your table have headers? And it's highlighted the data. If I go to this particular little set of data here and do my Control L, tries to create a table out of this set of data. So that's table creation. M is unassigned. N, logically N for new document. Control N creates a brand new document. And close that. New doc. What you will have noticed then is that closing of that document was very quick because I used a keyboard shortcut, which is Control W. Close document, or close window for W if you want to use the letters to try and remind you what they do. Control O for open. Nice and logical. Open brings me to the open dialog box, so I can go searching for a file. Open doc. Control P. Instead of paste getting the P, it's actually Mr. Print that got the P. Control P brings up the print dialog box, which in this version of Excel is the print and print preview dialog box. Control Q activates our quick analysis tool that we've already seen in action. It allows us to access quick formatting, charts, totals, tables, and spark lines. And notice there's no recommended tables and charts here because the data that we're selecting does not contain any numerical values. So that's the quick analysis. Control R. This is a bit like Control D, which is ditto from above. Control R, ditto from the left. If I do Control R here, I'll actually get an R because there's an R on the left. Let's do it here. So let's just widen that column. If I do it here, I get the words quick analysis. So it's dittoing from the left as opposed to ditto from above. Ditto from left. You may want to think of it as ditto to the right, and then the R makes more sense. Control S, logical, not just an Excel shortcut, works everywhere, and that's save. Control T is the more common shortcut for a table, create table. And it does the same as Control L in that it highlights the data that you're within and tries to create a table from that. Create table, T for table, very logical. Control U, underline. If I type the word in and then do Control U, you can see that it gets underlined. So the B, I, and U are nice little formatting ones. They're all accessible from the icons up here, but it's much quicker to stay on the keyboard. We did the W and the X as close document and cut, leaving us simply with Y and Z. Well, I would hope that Z you know and use. If not, it certainly ranks up highly there with Control S for undo. And then Control Y is redo. So these two belong together, because you can only redo things you've undone. Each click of Control Z is another step backwards. It goes back 1, back 2, back 3, back 4. So it keeps going backwards until you decide to redo with Control Y. So I could do Control Z now and step back through all the typing that I've done in this little column. And we can come back forwards with Control Y to fill it all back in again, including everything I've typed. And that's your Control and the letter of the alphabet keyboard shortcuts for Excel. 24 of them are in use. J and M are not used, but all the others do something useful that keeps your hands on the keyboard instead of getting the mouse and going searching through the ribbons and the menus. The ribbons that you're given after a default installation of Excel 2013 do not have to be the ones that you work with. You might feel that because of the work that you do, you'd like to change the ribbons and have different ones on the home ribbon or different ones on the insert ribbon or the formulas ribbon or the data ribbon. By default, you'll find that you actually don't have the developer ribbon that I have here. You would need to activate that. So how can we customize the ribbons that we've got, including turning on the developer ribbon and customizing the quick access toolbar? That's this little shortcut item here. Now you can choose the shortcuts to add to here from the drop list. That's the easiest way. Perhaps I use sort ascending or descending quite commonly, so I'll add those. Or the quick print, although that is quite dangerous in Excel to send things straight to the printer, so I'm going to turn that off. But I do email files, so let's turn email on. So we can add and remove options that are in this list here. We may wish to add further options to the quick access toolbar, and we may wish to customize the ribbon. Both of those are done effectively in the same place. We can access that place in 2 steps. One is to go here to more commands from the drop-down list, and that takes us into the Excel options quick access toolbar, where we can customize our quick access toolbar, but we can also customize the ribbon, so they're just above each other. If I cancel that, we can get to that same place by going to File, Options, Customize the ribbon, or customize the quick access toolbar. Now with the quick access toolbar selected, these are the icons we can currently see on there. Save, undo, redo, sort ascending, sort descending, and email. Now with the quick access toolbar, you can actually effectively have 2 quick access toolbars. One for all documents, so these are the icons you would see whichever Excel file you have open, or you can create quick access toolbar per Excel file. So each Excel file could have a different set of icons on the quick access toolbar. They would still have the ones that are on all documents, so they'd still have all of these, but they would have additional options that you might add to here. That's quite useful if you have, say for example, a large Excel file and it really needs its own shortcuts, then put them on the customized quick access toolbar for that particular file, and they're only there when that file's open. But how do we add icons to either of the quick access toolbars? Default one that all files get, or the customized one for the current file? We simply select icons from the left-hand column here. This left-hand column are all the Excel actions. At the moment, we're looking at what are classed as popular commands, but we can change that filter to commands not in the ribbon, all commands, macros, commands on the File tab, commands on the Home tab, the Insert tab, the Page Layout tab, etc. You can see there are other filters we can put in place. These are the sensitive ribbons, the context sensitive ribbons, so Pitch Tools Format tab. We can pick icons off anywhere. If we revert to the Home tab, I'll then see the icons that are available on the Home tab, and it may be that in my quick access toolbar, I'd quite like to have copy. So I choose copy and add, and it gets added to my quick access toolbar. I can take them out the same way, select and remove. So I can add and remove icons to my quick access toolbar. Let's put the copy back over. So I like copy, and we'll have cut, add, and paste as well. You'll notice that they are all in alphabetical order. Paste. Now paste has a number of options. These two have little extras. You can see if you hover, you'll get told this is the clipboard paste menu. This is the simple paste, by clicking the big button on the home ribbon. And then this one's paste gallery. And there's even paste using the text import wizard, if you tend to paste text in from another file. So I've added 3. Okay, they then appear up here on my quick access toolbar. Now, just the same way that we can add icons and remove them from the quick access toolbar, we can do that to any one of the other ribbons. File, options, customize the ribbon. Now here are the main ribbons. I just compress that one: home ribbon, the insert ribbon, page layout, formulas, data, review, view, developer, add-ins, and I've got additional background removal. Now, developer is not on by default, so you would find that you didn't have a tick in there. Well, I can put the tick back in because I want the developer ribbon. If I want to add other icons to my ribbons, I simply expand them out, and you'll see they have groups. So I could expand out the alignment group. See how these are grayed out? You're not allowed to remove them. There's no remove or add option. I can't add other items in to the groups on the default ribbons. Best thing to do really would be to actually create your own ribbon. So we go to new tab, because effectively that's what you're creating, a new tab on the current ribbons. I can give that new tab a name, guys commands. Okay. On that tab, I need at least one new group, if not more. If I need more, I can click new group to create a new group. I'm going to rename this group, as well as giving the group a name. You can give it an icon as well. Let's have no imagination and call it group 1. Okay, and then add a new group and rename that group 2. I can then add the commands that I want to use to my little groups. I could add the email, group 1. Notice here I'm just dragging them over to group 2, center align to group 1. Obviously, when doing this yourself, you would choose the commands that you want. So insert columns and insert rows. So I've added a number of commands to the group 1 group and 1 to the group 2. Okay. There's my new ribbon, guys commands. There's my groups, group 1 and group 2. So you can see the naming of the group makes sense if you give it a sensible name, because it will appear below the grouping, just as it does on all the others: clipboard, font, alignment, number. So mine's group 1 with a number of icons, and group 2 with a number of icons. The only difference here is that my ribbon is not in uppercase. It would be a good idea to rename that to be guys commands. That way it falls in the same pattern: uppercase, uppercase, uppercase. So you see we can add icons to the quick access toolbar. Any icon you like for a command that exists in Excel can be added to the quick access toolbar, and you can create your own tab within the ribbons. Within that tab you can create your own groups and then add commands in to each of those groups so that they're sensibly grouped, so they make sense when you're looking at it and you know, well, that's all the data commands and that's all the formatting commands. However you want to group them together for them to be useful to you. If you want to add a workbook's full path for its sheet name or its single file name without the path to an Excel workbook, then it's really very easy if you use the header and footers. We simply go to View, Page Layout. This will then show you the option for the headers, where I can click to add a header, go to Header and Footer Tools Design, and I have options to insert the file path, or the file name, or the sheet name. Very easy. However, if what I don't want to do is actually place it in the header, but in a cell on the sheet, so if I click and go back to View, Normal, then it isn't so easy. We need to do some manipulation. First thing is I can get the full path, which includes the file name and the sheet name, by going to equals cell, open brackets, open speech marks, file name, close speech marks, close brackets, return, and I get some of what I'm after. I get the full path here to the file, including the file name, celldata.xlsx, including the sheet name. If, however, what I want to display on the sheet is either or the file name or the sheet name, I need to do some string manipulation to extract just the file name and just the sheet name. Luckily, it is made slightly easier for us in that always the workbook is encompassed in square brackets. So I can extract from that string by using the mid function. So that's part of a string, the middle of a string. Text is the cell in this case that I want to extract some data from. That's that cell there, comma. The start num is the first character that I would like to extract. Well, that's all the way to that S. How do I know where that S is? Because the file path will always be different lengths. Well, I could tell it to look for that square bracket, hence the usefulness of the square bracket. So we can use the find function to find a square bracket within our same string, close brackets on the find. Then I need to add on one more character because I don't want the square bracket, I want the next character. So we're now in our mid function, we're looking in A9 and we're finding out what the character position is of the first character after the square bracket, comma. Then how many characters do I actually want to extract? Because the file names will always be different lengths. So to carry out a decision on how many characters to extract, I need to find out where the closed square bracket is. Find, open brackets, open speech marks, the closed square bracket, close speech marks, comma, within the same text string, close brackets. So that will give me the position of the closed square bracket. What I then need to do to figure out how many characters are here is to take the position of the closed square bracket and take away the position of the S. Take away, find, open speech marks, the opening bracket. I'm not looking for an S because the file name could begin with anything. It's the square bracket that will always be there. I'm looking for the square bracket in A9. I find the position of the closed square bracket and I take away the position of the opening square bracket and then take one more character off so that I don't display any of the square brackets. And then I can close the round bracket for my mid function. Although it looks quite messy, it is going to work for us every time. The name of the file name is sales data. If I then move that to here, and just put a little label in, file name. Now to extract the sheet name, things are slightly easier. Let's just widen that, because I'm just looking for where that square bracket ends, so the closing square bracket, and then I want all the characters after that. So it's the mid function again, looking at my full string, starting at wherever the close square bracket is. So I need to find the close square bracket using the find function within this string, add one character on, because I don't want the square bracket, I want the first character after there. So that's the start point. But then how many characters? Well, I want to go from there to the end. So the number of characters is going to be the length of that whole string. Take away wherever the close square bracket is. I've just copied that function and pasted it in. Copied one too many commas. So we're going for the length of the whole string, take away wherever the square bracket ends up, close, return, and I get Jan. Now this whole lot here, I could copy that whole section, place it in February and paste. And we find that I get the full path again, which is the same file path and the same file name, but the sheet name's changed. It now says Feb. So although that might seem quite long-winded, you can extract the sheet name using a function in Excel without the requirement for some clever Visual Basic. So from that same string, I'm able to use the function to extract the file name and then another function to extract the sheet name, all based around where these square brackets are located in the string, because that's the giveaway key for where the file name starts and ends and where the sheet name's going to start from. Until Excel 2013, there wasn't a very easy way to display the current formula within a cell. I mean, you can go to the cell, taking our mortgage function sheet, for example, open up the cell and you can see the formula. But what about, I want to keep the result on the screen and see what formula's in there? Well, I can look there at the same time, but it would be nice just to have the formula perhaps displayed here. Well, previously you would have had to go in, copy the formula, come into the next cell, put a single apostrophe so that it doesn't try and evaluate the formula, equals, and paste the formula in there, and that would work. However, if you went back then to this formula and made a change, for example, we might decide to take the years and multiply them by 52 and divide the interest rate by 52 so that we're working on weekly payments, then that would work out the value, 539 per week. However, as you can see, if we look, this has not replicated itself in the change in our formula underneath, because that was a copy and paste at that moment in time. So if we undo to put this back, what we really needed, and Excel have been so nice as to provide, is a formula that displays a formula. That formula is called formula text. It equals formula text, open brackets, show me that cell there, return, and it then shows me the formula currently being used in that cell. So if I then go back in and make that change to 52, because I'm now looking at weekly payments instead of monthly, the formula text formula updates itself and then shows me that I'm now looking at 52 rather than 12. So that's a clever brand new formula called formula text, and it works perfectly. Let's use it on this cell here. That's a formula, equals formula text, open brackets, look at that cell there please, and it returns the VLOOKUP formula that's currently happening here and in place. If I then make a change to this formula, perhaps something as simple as just fixing the array of the table, then I see that change here in the formula text field, because it's physically telling me the formula that's being used there. It has one slight drawback though. If we try and use the formula text formula on a cell that actually does not contain a formula, then we get one of Excel's little error messages, n/a. So we need to negate that. So for tidiness sake, we will make use of another new formula. So equals if is formula. So I physically go and check whether that cell is a formula or not. If it is, then I actually use the formula text function. If not, well, let's just output a little minus sign so we know that something is happening. Return, and there you see I get the little minus sign. If I then replicate this up to there, it then works. So it's checking to see if that cell there contains a formula. If it does, then that is formula function will return true, therefore dropping me into the first part of the if statement where it can carry out the formula text formula, thus showing me the actual formula being used. If it's false, it comes out and gives me a little minus sign. In the second sample there, where we're looking at 25, which is a static value, not a formula, it returns me a little hyphen. So you can use those in combination with each other for troubleshooting, really. If someone actually overwrites one of your formulas, this little formula that's checking to see if it is a formula will then not display the formula, but it will display a little hyphen. Or potentially you could go much further and get it to display a generic error message, such as missing formula, what have you been doing? So that's two new formulas. Formula text to display the formula, and it's dynamic, so if the formula changes, the display of that formula will change. Absolutely fantastic new formula. And then use that in conjunction with is formula to actually check whether the cell you're trying to look at the formula for contains a formula. An extremely powerful feature for an Excel pivot table is the drill down facility. Now this will work if you use recommended pivots or if you've built the pivot table yourself. So let's take our Sales Inc. 2013 data again. We click into the data and we'll have one of the recommended pivot tables, please. Let's go with the sales by month again, but we'll make a couple of amendments. First of those is to move the month name into the columns and then bring down the item name into the row. Now we have a crisscross of where items have been sold by different months. So the values are spread about the place because some months we didn't sell some of the items. Now, if at any point you find a number, this one here, for example, 2118, a question find China mug with horse theme print in March, and you're not quite sure that you trust the number 2118, where's that been derived from? If you ever want to see a breakdown or analysis of how Excel has got to that value, simply double click it. And what it will do is it will make an extraction from the data that the pivot table is based on and show you the rows, so the whole rows, not just the numbers that it's adding up to get the number, that it has used to give you those values. So here I've double clicked 2118. It then pulls out the data. Let's just widen those columns, which is an extraction from the data in the sales data sheet anyway, and says those three values there, total price, will add up to 2118, which I can see in the status bar. They're all the same mug and they're all in March. So I can then start to trust the data. It always pulls this data out into a blank sheet. So that's now in sheet 4. And I can do that with any numbers. I could do it with any of the month numbers or even any of the total numbers. What about this one here? 17549. Done horse mug coaster set. That's the grand total. I'm not really sure how it's got that. Double click. Extracts the data. If it auto fit the columns as well, that would make life a lot easier. And if we highlight the total prices, we can see that they add up to 17549. They are all the same mug. They're for different months because we went for the grand total column and double click the value. So that will work on any value inside the pivot table, regardless of whether you built it with the recommended option or whether you built it yourself. All of these numbers have numbers behind them, which all came from here. It's only using your data. Now, if you're supplying this pivot table to third party or someone else, even within the same organization, and you don't want them to be double clicking to drilling down, then you can actually turn that off as an option in the pivot table by going to the pivot table options. So you need to be in the pivot table so that the pivot table tools toolbar is available. Over in the options here on the left hand side, and then options, data, and here where it says enable show details, we take that tick out so that the drill down doesn't work effectively. And then we say OK. And now when you try to double click a number, you'll get a little error message. Cannot change this part of a pivot table report. So you've effectively disabled that drill down capability. Now, obviously, anybody who knows about pivot tables knows they can go back in and turn that option on. They would need to know that. We do, so we can turn it back on and we can drill back down. So that's drilling down into the data behind a pivot table. Now, if that pivot table is connected to an external data source, you won't see that data source as a separate tab here. But as long as drill down is enabled, when you drill down, it will still pull through an extraction of the data that Excel has used to create that number. So you will still get this information here, even if you cannot see the whole data. So a little trick would be to go to the very last bottom right hand corner, to the grand total number, which might be a way down on this one, there it is. Double click that, and effectively you're then extracting all the data, because that's how it gets the grand total. It uses all the data. More of a little trick than anything, because if it's in Excel, you already have that data here anyway, but externally you wouldn't. So that's drill down, capability that you can turn on or turn off. By default it's on, and it allows you to effectively see how the calculations have taken place. Quite useful if you've got a number that you're not quite trusting and thinking, well, where's that number come from? Double click and Excel will show you where it's got the number from. If you ever need to create columns of data that don't quite match or are quite difficult to do when using some of the formulas that are available in Excel, then the flash fill, which is actually new to 2013, is going to blow your mind. That's possibly over egging it a little, isn't it? Well, let's see it in action and see how impressed you can be. We're going to take the employees file from your working folder and just insert another column here. If I wanted, for example, first initial and the surname of all my employees listed in this column here, then I could use a number of text manipulation functions to do that. Or, cleverly, I can use flash fill. Now, how the flash fill works is that you give it a sample of something and then it figures out the rest. So the sample I'm going to give it is W. Parker. So that's Wendy's first initial and her surname. And then make sure I go back onto W. Parker, go to the data ribbon and come along to flash fill. You click this and just watch what happens. As if by magic, everybody's first initial and their surname then appears in this column. They are not formulas, they are actual static values. They are text you can get in and make a change. But the flash fill has actually filled that in for you. It's even done the column heading by taking first N and surname to give me a column heading sort of matches what I'm trying to do with the data. Now that is clever. Let's see it in action with the address. So a new column, and let's give it an example with our Wendy here. Let's say the Vale, which is her house, her street, and her town. Back onto the cell, flash fill, and it manages to go through all the data, picking out the house, the street, and the town, and it even does the column heading again, saying, okay, I've taken the house, the street, and the town city column, and I've stuck them all together in the pattern that I've assumed correctly. As long as the pattern makes sense, that's the main thing, then it can spot what you're trying to do. So you can use flash fill for what effectively would be clever concatenation, or even extraction. Let's see it do a little extraction. Let's scroll to the right and have a look at the email column. Now, if I wanted to extract from this email address the prefix, so everything before the @ that would take some fairly complicated formulas to find out where the @ is and then remove the rest and just leave the Wendy.Parker. Flash fill will do this for me. Let's insert another column and give it the sample of what we're looking for, which is Wendy.Parker. Okay, that's what I'm after, please, flash fill. Click back on Wendy Parker and flash fill. Now it doesn't quite do it, does it? It's gone and chosen first name dot surname. So it's sort of got it right, Wendy.Parker, Mario.DeSilva. But when we get to the next one, it's gone for Arthur.Great rather than AG at. And the next one, it's gone for Michael.Fontenroy rather than Mike at. Now we do get a little menu with our flash fill that pops out here, where we can undo the flash fill, or we can accept its suggestions, or we can select all the cells that it's changed because we want to do something else to them. Well, it's actually got it wrong. I'm going to undo the flash fill. Now the reason that it went for first name, surname is because that's where it looked. It looks at the whole data and says, I think you want Wendy.Surname, first name dot last name. Now we can trick it into not going that far by actually inserting another column here and leaving this blank, in which case, when it's looking for a possible solution, it won't go over this blank column. So this ditch is in its way. So now it can only look at the data here on the left and on the right, but there's nothing else there where it could effectively misinterpret what I'm asking for with Wendy.Parker. Then we hit the flash fill, and we see that this time it understands it. Wendy.Parker is the prefix to the @ Mario de Silva is the prefix to the @ AG is the prefix to the @ Mike is the prefix to the @ Grant is the prefix to the @ So we had to sort of trick it a little, but it still did it. It understood what I was after and went ahead much quicker than trying to use some complicated if and find and mid functions to effectively strip out the prefix to the @ So their mailbox name is what I've been after here. I can then go delete that empty column because it's done its little job for me, and I'll just rename this column as prefix. That's their email mailbox. So that's flash fill. It's certainly worth a try. Select the cell, flash fill, and see what it does. You'll notice that there was a keyboard shortcut for that as well. You can make it work even faster. If you hover, you see it says Control E. Pick a blank column, put in what you think, flash fill, see what it does. Notice we needed that blank column to try and trick it not to using other columns in the list, but apart from that, it still saved a lot of formula work. Now, if you're entering numbers and dates into Excel, we know that it deals with these things quite happily. But there are occasions when you don't want Excel to play around with or reconfigure what you've typed in. For example, if we were to take our data entry sheet, and on the Numbers tab, just type in a number with a leading 0, such as 0167. We press return and the leading 0 is removed because Excel thinks it's trying to be helpful. It becomes even more of a pain with some dates. If we want to type in a date, that's quite happily month / day, the year, and quite happily it converts that to a date, and we know it's dealing with it as a date as we are right aligned. Let's just widen column A so we can see any alignments that take place. Now sometimes you might want to type a reference number that could be interpreted as a date. For example, if we went for 9-5-54, which is actually a reference number for a product, I enter that into an Excel cell, press return, and Excel converts that into a date for me, 9/5/1954. Well, that's not what I wanted to happen. So this problem of removing leading zeros, problem of converting what looks like a date into a date when it's not really a date, all need to be overcome. And there are really two ways of doing that. One is to simply type a single apostrophe when you enter the value. So I come down to A4, I type a single apostrophe, put my 0167, just as I tried in A1 before, and when I press return, I see that it's left a line, hence it's being treated as text. The leading zero is still there, that's the most important thing. I do get one of those little warning indicators, which if I click on, tells me that that number is being stored as text. Do I wish to convert it to a number? Do I wish to ignore the error? I'd actually like to ignore the error because it's not an error, it's intentional. And I can do the same with a reference that might be a date. So a single apostrophe, 9-5-54, return, and that remains as I've typed it because of the single apostrophe. Again, you get the little warning which you can choose to ignore or tell it to ignore. But what you'll see is it tries to convert it to a date. Actually, ignore it. Stop trying to convert this to a date. That's method number one, the single apostrophe. Now you'll see in the cell that that's not visible, but if you actually click back onto edit, you can see the single apostrophe at the top, so you can see what you've done or what someone else has done to try and stop Excel from converting your reference to a date or for losing your leading zeros off of large numbers. Now the other option is to actually pre-format the cell as a text cell. If I move to A6, choose the quick formatting drop down and choose text, then I'm predefining that cell as a text cell so that when I then type in 0167 and return, it stays left aligned. I don't lose my leading zero. I do get the little warning symbol about it being treated as text, but what is missing is the single apostrophe up here. So people don't immediately see what you've done to leave it alone. We've actually pre-formatted the cell. You cannot post format, so I cannot type in 0167 and then tell it to be text because the zero will have already been taken away by them. The same with the date, or in our case, the reference number. I have to pre-format that cell as text. So obviously you could do a whole sheet or a whole row or a whole column if you need it to be like that the whole way through. Then type in my reference number, which is the same number to prove it works, return, and it doesn't get messed around with. It doesn't get reconfigured into a date. It gets left as a text value. So those are your two options. The single apostrophe, which you must physically type at the beginning of the line, or you pre-format the cell or number of cells as a text cell, and Excel then knows that it's not to change, manipulate, make any adjustments at all to what you've typed. And that's very useful for reference numbers not being changed into dates, and for numbers with leading zeros to not lose your leading zeros. When using Excel, sometimes you need today's date or the current time. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a little let's go to insert on the ribbons and look for date and time and insert it. If we want to insert into a cell today's date or the current time, we either need to think, do I need it to be fixed? So do I need to insert today's date and then for it always to stay the date that we have now? Or do I want to insert today's date and for it to change to today's date every time I open the file? Therefore, a formula. So there are two ways of getting the date, and the same goes for the time. Two ways of getting the time. Do I want effectively a static time? So I insert the time, it displays, and it remains at that time forevermore. Or do I want to insert a dynamic time, in which case it will always change when I reopen the file or when I refresh the file. Let's look at the static versions first. So to get today's date, I'm just using a blank file here, really called today. Let's go into B1. There is a keyboard shortcut to give you today's date, and that's Control and the semicolon. And you'll see today's date then appears. I just press return to accept that, and it's a fixed value, 9/8/2013. When I open this file tomorrow, it will still say 9/8/2013. If, however, I want this to be dynamic, therefore changing every time I open the file, I use a formula, and that formula is equals today. It requires an open brackets and it requires a closed brackets, but it has nothing in those brackets, unlike our other formulas. When I press return, that gives me exactly the same value as I have in B1, or currently it gives me the same value as I have in B1. If we were to sit and wait for 24 hours until tomorrow, I could then reopen the file. The top one would still say 9/8/2013, but the lower one would say 9/9/2013. It's dynamic, it's a formula. That's equals today or Control semicolon to get you a static value. today's date. What about the time? Well, let's pick on another cell. Control Shift semicolon gives you the current time, and that's pulling through at 9:38 p.m. That's static. That will remain 9:38 p.m. When I close and open the file, it will still say 9:38 p.m. regardless of the actual time at that stage. If I want it to be dynamic and pull the time as it stands when the file is opened, then I use another formula, which is equals now. Just like the today one, it requires an open and a close bracket, but nothing between them. And when I return, I get time. Now, I've also got the date and the time because of the formatting that initially gets added. But if I click back on, go to the drop down for formatting and choose time, I'm then just given time. It also gives me the seconds. If I don't want to see the seconds, I just go back to format, so go into the extra formatting option, choose time, and then I can either go for a 24-hour clock or a 12-hour clock. Well, let's stick with 12 because that's what I got when I did Control Shift semicolon. Okay, and now that says 9:39. This one hasn't changed. This one's moved on. The today formula and the now formula are not like mathematical formulas that will refresh themselves and change whenever the cells that it's looking at change, because these two formulas are not looking at any cells. They will refresh when the file is open. So when you reopen the file, you'll get a new time and potentially a new date if it's a different day. Or on the formula ribbon, we can actually tell the file to calculate again. So I can calculate the sheet or calculate now, which calculates the entire workbook. Well, I've only got these on one sheet, so let's stick with the sheet. I calculate the sheet, and you'll see that the time has changed. We've still got the same date, but the time has now moved forward. So that's equals now to get the time, Control Shift semicolon to get the static fixed time, Control semicolon to get static fixed date, and equals today to get today's date. Any of those four cells can be formatted as you would wish to see them, but the raw value underneath them is date or time. When it comes to having quite long cells with content in, usually text content, then there are a number of things we can do to deal with that text content. Taking our employees file, there is a sheet in here called TBL Employees V2, where the full address is actually in one cell. If we want that whole address to be visible, we could just make sure that we auto widen the column to be as wide enough to show everybody. That's not always feasible. We might not want all that space to be used horizontally. So we could drag in the width of the column, and as long as there's nothing in the next column, if I delete this telephone number, for example, then the address will run across the front of the next column. So we can see that it looks like it's across there. If I put the telephone number back, then the address does not run over. So we need other ways of dealing with what effectively are wide columns full of text and still be able to read them. Well, there are a number of options. The first obviously was to auto fit the column, but sometimes that makes it go wider than the screen and it's not really user friendly. Second option is to wrap the text, and we do that by selecting the cells in question. So let's select the whole column. That then causes any text that is not visible to wrap within the cell. And we can see that the wrapping is in slightly different places dependent on the length of the text. The wrapping will always take place at a space. It will never split words. That's a potential option, but that will increase the height of the column. If we turn wrap text back off, then we go back into everything disappearing. Another option is to actually shrink the text to fit. Now, if you want to shrink everything so that it fits at this width and the height without increasing the height of the rows, then we again select the relevant cells. So I've selected the whole column. Go on to the home ribbon, and we need to go into the extra settings here. So it's either that button, or that button. They will all take you to the same dialog box, which is the Format Cells dialog box. On the Alignment tab, here we have an option to shrink to fit. Okay, now you'll see that that does work, but it does mean any long addresses are shrunk very small. That one there, for example, shrunk so small that it's very hard to read and potentially very borderline on whether when you print that it would be legible. However, it has done what we've asked it to do, which is to shrink the text within the available width and the available height. So it doesn't wrap and doesn't increase the height of the rows, and it doesn't widen the columns so that you then have a very wide column. Now you'll find the shrink to fit in place. If I do widen the column slightly, then everything can increase a little bit to still be visible. That one's now visible. You could get a balance between shrinking to fit and widening the column so that it suits you. It's just another option for dealing with cells with extra text. We go back in, we can turn shrink to fit off. So we have the options of wrap text, shrink to fit. If you do choose wrap text, which is a pretty popular option, the wrapping takes place at the point Excel thinks is most appropriate. And really it just sees, well, I can't fit the 7YT in, so let's put that on a new line. In this particular case, I can't fit the Yorkshire in, so let's put that on a new line. What's happening in some cases, it's splitting the postal code. In other cases, it's splitting the county. And in this particular case here, it's splitting the town, Newcastle-upon Tyne. We can actually manually override where the wrapping takes place. If we leave wrap text on, and then we enter each cell, that's the only drawback, it would have to be done at each cell. We can actually effectively insert a line break within our cell by placing the cursor where you want in the cell. So I'm going to place it there before the county name. We cannot press enter because that just enters the data and knocks us down to the next cell anyway. What we're after is inserting a little line break there, and that's achieved by holding down the Alt key on the left of your keyboard and then pressing enter. That then inserts a manual line break at that point and potentially makes the cell easier to read. This one, Alt return. On this one, keep the full county name together, Alt and return. And the same here. It's a great little tool, but it has that drawback that it's a manual process. You go into the cell, you place your cursor at the point where you want the line break, and then Alt and enter. There's nothing to stop you having multiple line breaks within a cell. I may wish to put another one there, Alt, enter, and I end up with 2 line breaks. And when I press return, the content drops and the height goes even higher because I've now got 3 rows of text. So it's just another way of dealing with large quantities of text in a single cell in Excel. You have wrap text to allow Excel to do it. We have auto fit the width of the column, so it goes as wide as it needs to for the widest entry, which sometimes can be wider than the screen. Shrink to fit, so that everything fits and is visible in the cell at the width and the height you set. Sometimes the text size does drop very small though. Or we have our manual breaks that we can put into a cell using Alt and Enter to place a manual line break in a cell at the point where you have the cursor. Place my cursor there, Alt, return, and I get a manual line break. One way of speeding up your use of Excel is to move around much quicker between open workbooks or even sheets in the same workbook. If we open a number of workbooks, and I have open the sales data file, the employees file, and the sample file, all of which are in your working folder, then we can have a look at how we can move between open workbooks much quicker than our quite common way of clicking down on the taskbar. Now, if you have 3 workbooks open in Excel, and there isn't a restriction on how many you can open, that's dependent on your file system and your computer as to how much it can handle. But to move between open workbooks, we go to View on the ribbon, come across to Switch Windows, and you can simply then choose the number to go to. That's View, Switch Windows, choose the number to go to. Now, if you recall accessing the ribbons via the keyboard, you'll know that we could perhaps do it that way much faster. Alt to activate the ribbon shortcuts, W for the View ribbon, W then for Switch Windows, and then either 1, 2, or 3, depending on which file you want to go to. So we could say 3. Obviously, I've done that quite slowly, but you could get that quite quickly. Alt W, W, 1, and it jumps to the employees. Alt W, W, 3, jumps back to the sample. That's one way of moving quite quickly through open workbooks, and that's quite a useful way if you don't actually know which workbooks you've got open or which one you want to go to. Now, there are other keyboard shortcuts for moving between workbooks. We have Control and Tab, for example. So here I am in the sample one. Control Tab takes me to the next open workbook, which happens to be the employees one. Control Tab takes me to the next open workbook, which happens to be the sales data one. And then Control Tab takes me back round to the sample one. And that is much quicker than Alt W, W and a number, because it just moves to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. There is another keyboard shortcut that does exactly the same thing, and that's Control F6. Now, the reason that there are 2 Office shortcuts for moving between open documents in this case is because Control F6 will work here in Excel, and it will work in Word, and it will work in Access, but Control Tab won't, because Control Tab in Word actually does something in the document, so you can't use it there. Hence, the 2 shortcuts. Control Tab moves you to the next document. Control F6 works in all other Office applications to move you between open documents in the same program. Or we've got the go to view and go to windows, either with the mouse or with the keyboard. Now within the same workbook, you'll have a number of worksheets. And we can see here in the sales data one that there are 12. There's one for each month of the year, and we know that we could take our mouse and click on the tab we want to go to. Sometimes, and not in this particular case, but sometimes the sheet names are either very long or there are a lot of them and you can't see all the tabs across the bottom, and then you end up with these little navigation keys for moving them along. If, for example, I were to just take a number of these and replicate them, just for the purposes of having lots of tabs, here we now cannot see all of the tabs, and we have to use our little navigation keys to bring them into view. Even the navigation keys that require the mouse can use a shortcut. If, for example, I do Control and the left one, it brings the first sheet into view. It doesn't move me to it, I'm still in September, but it brings it into view. If I do Control and the last arrow, it brings the last sheet into view, which happens to be June 2, but I'm still in September. So that's a clever little way of jumping from one end to the other, or single click to move. The other option is to right click here. That then gives me a list of all the active workbooks, and I may wish to go to August. Okay, and I jump to August. Right click, February 2. Okay. So the sheet does not need to be on view when you use that right click because it just gives you the list of all the sheets. Sticking with the keyboard, quite a popular option, we can do Control and page up to move one sheet to the left. You can see that I'm moving from December to November to October to September to August to July, and Control and page down logically then moves you to the right. Once you get to the very last sheet, you don't go any further. Each Control page down does nothing. And the same the other way. So Control page up will take me a sheet to the left. Notice you can go quite fast until you get to the first sheet, and then it goes no further. So we have some ways of moving between open workbooks and between sheets within the same workbook. If you've ever spent a long time creating a multiple sheet workbook, you'll know what a pain it is to then have to go back and make changes to versions of those sheets. Looking at our sales data 2013 file, for example, we have a 12-sheet workbook here where every sheet is exactly the same structure. It just holds the data for a different month of the year. But then what happens when your line manager turns around and says, actually, you've missed out an item that we want to hold the sales for. And that item is helicopters. So I now need to add in a new column to all of these sheets that will allow us to enter helicopters. That column needs to be exactly the same place in each of the sheets, and the formulas need to be exactly the same in each of the sheets. Otherwise, the totals won't work for us. The last thing we want to do is to insert a column in January and then go and insert a column in February and then in March and then in April and then in May. We want to be able to do all 12 sheets in one go. Where you have a number of sheets, as we have here, that are exactly the same makeup and you want to make changes to all of them in one go, we can do that. We need to multiple select all the sheets. The easiest way to achieve that is by clicking on the first sheet and then holding down the Shift key and clicking on the last sheet. That will then select all of the sheets. Anything I do now happens in all of them. If I want to unselect, I right click and choose Ungroup the Sheets. If I want to select sheets that are not consecutive, maybe I want to do something in every quarter, then I click on the first and then Control click any others that I would need. So that way I've got 4 sheets. Anything I now do will happen to just those 4 sheets. Ungroup, but I want them all. So first sheet and then Shift click the last sheet. You can move between the sheets, but it will deselect the selection. There is a trick, however. If I add a new sheet here, put that at the beginning, just call it sample. If I then multiple select January to December, you'll find that they will stay selected and you can move between them. So you can actually be looking at a different sheet when you do the work, but it will still happen to all of them. That's quite useful for being able to check that what you've done has happened. But that only works if you have one sheet in the whole workbook that is not part of your group. If you have all the sheets selected, as we did originally, when you click off the first one, it deselects the group, the same as right-clicking and ungrouping the sheets. So let's look at August and do the work in August. So I need a new column. So I come here between the last column and the total column and insert, and this is going to be helicopters. Return. Notice the formatting is copied from the left-hand one anyway. I also need the totals in place, so I'll replicate that formula across and then add in a few cells for helicopters. Now the cells that I'm adding in will actually go into every sheet, and I can check that by perhaps clicking on April. And you can see I have the same sales for helicopters, but the sales for the others will have changed to that particular month. What I do need to do is make sure that the formulas have added in this new column, because they don't always. So let's go to the end here and have a look. Note we can see it's missed off. So I need to extend that selection. I'm still selected, so this will do on all of them. And then replicate this formula downwards to West region. Notice the borders have all gone wrong. Undo. We'll undo it across all 12 sheets. Let's drag that down with the right mouse button. Because I filled without the formatting, it's now copied just the formula down on all of the sheets, so we know they're all working. Check that one. It's adding across the whole row. Whilst I've got all the sheets selected, not only can I make insertions of rows and columns and formulas, I can do formatting. It may be that I don't like this blue background at the top, so let's change that to a purple background, and that too will affect every sheet. It's multiple selecting them, control click for non-consecutive sheets, shift click for a group, so you click the first one, shift click the last one, and then you can make any changes you like, and it will happen to every sheet in the same place, be that a formula, be that a column insertion, be that a row insertion, be that a deletion. Perhaps we don't want to do speedboats anymore. Anything you want to do will happen to all of the sheets because they're now grouped together. I then click a sheet not part of the group to ungroup them, or as you saw earlier, we can right click and ungroup the sheets. Make sure that you do have the sheets ungrouped before going back in and making the separate changes to the helicopter sales. Otherwise that will happen to all the sheets as well. So every month of the year will have the same helicopter sales. If we go through separately, they won't. They'll all have different helicopter sales. So that's dealing with a multiple sheet workbook and being able to edit, insert, delete, manage the content of multiple sheets within that workbook. Introduced in 2013 were recommended charts. Recommended charts allows you to take some data and be offered a number of recommendations for a new chart. So there are a couple of ways of accessing the recommended charts option. First is to highlight the data we would like to chart. Up pops the quick analysis icon. We can give that a click and we have an option to access formatting, charts, totals, tables, sparklines, where we want charts. And then we can hover over the recommended charts here to see what kind of chart we will get. So that's a clustered column. And you can see there, it actually tries to graph the total as a line for each of the values as a column. Clustered bar also includes the totals, clustered column, stacked bar, clustered column. Now our chart really has been thrown out by those totals. Let's just go back in and re-highlight everything, including the labels, except the total column. Click our quick analysis option, come back to charts, and then hover over each of the recommended chart types. And you'll see that now, without the totals in place, the chart isn't so skewed. Stacked bars, clustered column, different color style. And then there is even more charts, which will take us into a further dialog box. So these are the recommended ones. Once I find one that I quite like, perhaps that one, I can choose that and I'll get my chart, which I can then move around and customize further using the chart customization options. If I don't want it anymore, let's delete. Now, another way of accessing the recommended charts is to go to the insert ribbon, choose the recommended charts, and we'll get a separate dialog box. Now you can see that these charts are the same ones that appeared in the quick analysis options. There's no different, you're still getting recommended the same chart types. If none of the recommendations work for you, you can then go into all charts. Effectively, even in here, you're getting a preview of the chart type. So stacked column, 3D clustered, 3D stacked, 3D 100% stacked, 3D column. You can see you can hover for it to zoom even further in. Or you can choose a line, again go through each of the options, a pie, go through each of the options, bar, area, XY, stock, surface, radar and combo. Not all of these, like radar and surface, stock, would make sense with all data types. But certainly column, line, pie and bar work well with any amount of data really. The recommended ones are here, and these are just quick charts. Quick and easy, I'll have that one, thank you. And off we go. Just delete that. Now there is an option to get a chart even faster than the recommended chart way. And that is still to highlight your data, including the titles. And then we can use a keyboard shortcut of F11. Ta-da! And you get a chart. It's the default chart type. In this case, it's a column chart. It's also placed in its own sheet, but you could move it if you wanted it as a small chart in, for example, your January sheet. But it's the fastest way of getting a chart in Excel, and that's F11. If you remember no other keyboard shortcuts from the whole of this title, then please go away with F11. It's a fast way of getting charts. If you don't highlight anything and attempt an F11, then Excel will guesstimate where the data is coming from. Now you'll see that it's, in this case, introduced the total in because it's guesstimated that your whole data is actually this whole table. It's not always a good idea not to highlight, but if you don't, it will still manage to create a chart. Even if you attempted to chart on a blank cell, F11, it still attempts to chart a blank cell and you end up with a blank chart. But it's looking at this cell here. Any of these can then be deleted. Delete. Delete, and you just retain the one that you want. That's recommended charts, which will give you a choice of charts to choose from, or the keyboard shortcut F11 for the quickest chart you could ever wish to create. Excel 2013 saw the introduction of recommended pivot tables. Now, if you've never used pivot tables before, or you need a quick pivot table, the recommended pivot tables option is absolutely fantastic. Now, there are two ways of accessing the recommended pivot tables. The first is to simply have some data open, as we have here with the employees file. Go to Insert on the ribbons, come down to Recommended Pivot Tables, give it a click. Just watch behind to make sure it's picked up the right data, which it will do as long as there are no gaps in columns and rows. You can have gaps in some of the data, but you can't have a fully empty column or a fully empty row. Now with our data, it's then recommending a number of tables. We have this first one, count of ID by marital status. So that's going to count how many people are in each of the marital status. We have 47 singles, 9 divorced, 43 married, and then 1 blank, so an undefined one. Or we could have sum of salary by marital status. So it's adding up the total salary bill each of the marital status. We then have sum of sex by marital status. Well, that's just really counting how many people there are as well. Count of ID, sum of salary, so that's doing two things. That's based on the person's title, and then counting how many there are, and then summing their salary. Sum of salary and count of ID. Okay, they're starting to get a bit messy. This one's quite useful. Sum of salary by county. You can see it's summing up the total by county. And it has a little plus next to each one, so it will actually expand when we click. Sum of salary by department, so the total salary bill for each department. Sum of sex by department, again, not very applicable. Sum of sex by county, same issue, and sum of sex by title. These are the recommended ones. The ones that I personally quite like are sum of salary by department, sum of salary by county, and then the actual count of people by marital status. If you quite like any of them, you simply select the one you want. So let's go for the sum of salary by department, and then OK. And a new pivot table is inserted in a new sheet. You can see there, sheet 1. So my TVL employee still exists, nothing gets amended there. It just creates a new pivot table for me in a new sheet. How quick was that? We can do the same thing again. So we click into the data, insert recommended pivot table, and choose a different one. Let's go for the first one. Now that inserts itself in another new sheet. So we're going to have sheet 2, which is the marital status sums, and sheet 1, which is the total salary by department. These can be renamed. They're simply just new sheets with the pivot table dropped into them. Salary by department and employees by status. Now, the alternative method we could do with our employees is just to highlight part of a data set. Let's take the towns and the people's names. We'll take them all the way to the bottom, except for that last one. Now, sometimes when you highlight a selection, you'll get a little pop-up box here. It doesn't always appear though, but you'll find that if you right click, you can choose quick analysis, and that will give you the pop-up box. from within which we can choose tables. And then there are a number of our little recommended pivot tables. And all you need to do is hover, and you can see it produces each little recommended table as a pop-out until you see the one you like. I like that one, count of ID by county, marital status, breakdown of county and town, or the title count. I quite like this one. If I like that one, I click. It produces me a new pivot table in a new sheet, now called sheet 3. I'm going to call that county town breakdown. And that's actually counting how many people are in each county and then within each town within each county. So County Durham has 1 town, but North Yorkshire has 3, and we get the breakdown for the 3 towns. Teesside has 3, and again we get the breakdown. Town and Weir 1, West Yorkshire 2, and we get the breakdown. So that's come from the same data, but using that slightly different route of highlighting part of the data, choosing from the quick analysis pop-up toolbar, tables, and then just stepping through the recommended pivot tables. Alternatively, as we did the other two, you simply click into the data, in which case it will use all the data on the sheet, assuming there's no blank columns and rows. Insert recommended pivot table, and that's when you get the floaty box with the recommended pivot tables in. So a very quick way of creating pivot tables. We've already previously seen how we can create a pivot table very quickly using the recommended pivot tables. But what we're now going to have a look at is the ability to reference values that are displayed in a pivot table and use them outside of that pivot table. Something that might seem straightforward, but actually isn't. In order to do that, let's take our Sales Inc. 2013 and quickly create one of our recommended pivot tables. Insert recommended pivot tables, and we'll take this one here, the first one, sum of the total price by month. Okay, thank you very much. Now that gives us the total price that has been spent. But what we also want is the current quantity. So I'll bring that down to here. And that gives us the total number of items that have been spent. Now, if we wanted to add another column here that worked out the average by effectively dividing the total price by the quantity, then we can do that. Let's add ourselves a heading. And we can use our normal logic, which is to say equals that cell there. And notice how the formula just doesn't say B4. It says get pivot data, sum of total price, because that's the column, A3, that's where the table starts, month name, that's these, January. So it's going to get the value for the sum of the total price for the month name January. And we're going to divide that by that cell there. And again, I'm given another get pivot data formula, which says sum of cur QTY, which is the column heading. A3 is the start of the table, and then again month name January. And when I press return, we get 8.1565 as our average. Let's change that into money, $8.16. Now ordinarily you would think, let's take this formula and replicate down to the bottom, and it will give us the average for each of the other months. Unfortunately, as you can see, it doesn't. It just repeats the same formula, 816, 816, 816. The reason for that, if I check this one here, is it's still looking at January, and it's still looking at January in the second. So the get pivot data function is not a relative function. As soon as you copy it, it just copies the internal values. However, we could make it a relative function. And in order to make it a relative function, what we do is we'll go back to the first function. You always start with the first one and then replicate. And where it's telling it to get January, why don't we tell it to actually get the January title from a cell that contains January, and then when we replicate, it will look at a cell that contains February and then March. How logical is that? Well, let's delete January, including the speech marks, and tell it to go get the value that is in A4. We need to do the same with the second function. So the divide by 1, again, let's remove the January, including the speech marks, and tell that to look at January that is in A4. When we press return, we get the same value, $8.16, but we can now replicate this function, and we see that it then works out the value for us. Let's just check on May, because it's now using the same get pivot data function, same column, same start place for your table, the same month name column, but the value is now A8, which happens to be May, which is the row that we're in. And we're dividing by the sum of the quantity, starting in A3, using the month name as the lookup, using A8. That's how we can effectively trick the get pivot data function to go and get the correct row of information that we're after. So we can use a simple link equals a cell within a pivot table. That will then produce the get pivot data function for us. So we don't have to get the mechanics right for that, because you would have to really name these columns and lookups the correct name that the pivot table is using. So that's the column heading and then the column name here. We just change the reference so that it being a static fixed value to a cell, so that when we replicate, it then changes what it's looking at. So that gives you the ability to then use functions based on values that are sat inside a pivot table. If the pivot table updates itself and these values change, your functions will change. There is one little caveat to be wary of. Because the pivot table rewrites itself, if refreshing the pivot table causes it to effectively create more columns, it will overwrite your functions here. So you just have to be sure where you're adding these that any refresh of the data really is only going to change those numbers. And in our case, it will. There are only 12 months of the year. There's not suddenly going to be a 13th month selected, and we're only going to sum the price and the quantity. So these columns will stay in place. The numbers will likely change on a refresh, in which case our averages will change on a refresh. Quite a clever utility when dealing with data is the ability to get rid of duplicate values. It may be that you've copied and pasted some data from somewhere, or you've got a list of items that you just want the unique values from. If we take our fields file, for example, this has a number of tabs. It has the TBL employees tab, which is our normal list of employees that we use. Then we have the departments and the county as two separate tabs, where we've simply copied and pasted all the departments from the employees tab. Therefore they repeat because more than one person works in each department. And then the same with the counties. More than one person lives in each of the counties. So having got these lists, we may wish to see just the unique departments and the unique counties. Well, if we highlight our data, we can go to Data on the ribbons, come across to Remove Duplicates. It then gives me an option of, is it column A? No other column selected because I have column A selected. Does my data have headers? It does, in which case it will remove the word department from the duplicate testing check, and then OK. 92 duplicate values were found and removed. The 7 unique values remain, and there's my 7 departments. All the repeated values are then removed. Same with county. Let's not select the data this time. Remove duplicates. Column A is selected because I was in there anyway, so I didn't need to highlight it. The data has headers as well, so it takes county out, and then OK. 94 duplicate values found and removed, 5 unique values remain. So those are my 5 unique counties. So all of my employees live in one of these 5 counties. Now that's fine when I've got a list of data as we have there, and we just want to get rid of the duplicate values. If I look at the employees data itself, I can use the remove duplicates to remove entirely duplicate records. So I click into my data, go to remove duplicates. This time there are a lot more columns listed. It's also spotted that I do have headers because it's already got the tick here, and then my columns are headed up. Now with all the ticks in place, it will only remove duplicate values where every single one of those fields is equal. If I say OK, no duplicate values are found. If, however, I go back in, and let's say unselect all the columns, and let's just have a look at title, the first name, and the surname. Are there any duplicates in that case? If so, get rid of some. OK. 1 duplicate value was found and removed. 99 unique values remain. 2 of the records had exactly the same title, first name, and surname. OK. Now, if the duplicate removal is not what you want and it's taken the wrong information, you can quickly do an undo, and it will bring back your duplicate value. So that's the remove duplicates option. It works great on single columns for getting rid of all those duplicate values, but it even works well on sheets where there are multiple columns, because you can decide which of the columns, when working together, are the ones that will be classed as duplicates. So you can either use all of them, one of them, or a selection of them. If it then finds duplicates in the columns you've selected, it then removes the duplicate values. So the whole row gets removed, not just the items that are the same, but the whole row. If you've ever used the page filtering option in a pivot table, you'll know how useful it can be. Taking our Sales Inc. 2013 data, let's create a quick pivot table. So let's insert pivot table. We're not even going to go with the recommended ones this time. So I know what I want. It picks up the data for me, and it's going to place this pivot table in a new worksheet. That's fine. Now what I want it to do is have each of the items that we sell as a row heading, how much we've sold of each one as a value, and then place the month name as a page filter. So now by adding the month name as a page filter, it appears at the top here above the data, allowing me to then filter the data below by a particular month. So I could use February and it shows me the February numbers. I could choose August and it shows me the August numbers. There's even the option to multiple select by clicking the box, and then I can choose a number of months. The only issue with that is it just says multiple items here and you don't know which month it's selected without going back and seeing. If I turn that option off, I can then simply just filter by a single month. That's quite clever and it works. What would be even cleverer is if I could now, at the click of a button, create 12 pivot tables, one for each month of the year. Now I could do it one way by replicating this worksheet and then coming in and changing the filter at the top. So I would have 12 identical pivot tables and then just go into each sheet and change each one's filter. So the first one will be January, the second will be February, March, etc. Let's put this back to all and let's ask Excel to create those 12 pivot table sheets for me, but already have each of them filtered by each of the months. So instead of it just copying 12 times, it copies 12 times and does the filtering for each of the month names, and very cleverly renames each of the tabs as well. Well, let's see it in action. Now you'll have to be careful because it's simply 2 clicks, so keep your eyes open. It only works though if you have this page level filtering in place. Another little thing to be careful of is don't have a field up here that has a lot of items in. At the moment I've got 12, so that's okay. I'm going to end up with 12 sheets. If I were to place the row labels up there, so my item title, there are a lot of those, as you can see, into the hundreds. That would create hundreds of sheets. So a little bit of forward planning before you actually carry anything out like this would save a lot of work. We go to the pivot tables ribbon and then analyze, across to the left where it says options, and then simply choose this little option here, show report filter pages. Click. It then asks me which field in the report filter, so the page filter section here, do I want to use. Now, even though I've only got one field in there, it still asks me. So do I want to split this pivot table into all the month names? Yes, I do, thank you. Okay. And not even that slowly, we have January, show me the January data, February, show me the February data, March, show me the March data, all the way through to December, show me the December data. So it's done the copy and paste 12 times and applied the next filter in the list for me. Now that is extremely clever and very, very useful. It's also retained the full pivot table here in sheet 3, which is where it was, should I wish to then go through and have a look at any of them myself by filtering out. That's 12 new sheets, one sheet each filter option in the drop list here. Each of those are then already pre-chosen each of the values. So December's in the December, already chosen, November's already chosen, October's already chosen. So that's a matter of being in the pivot table, going to options, and just choosing the show report filter pages. As previously stated, be careful that you don't do that where a field has a lot of choices, which you will end up with a lot of sheets. Instead of going for a full-blown chart in Excel, we now have the ability to add sparklines to your data. What these are effectively inline little mini graphs that can display the pattern of the data. Let's take our sales data 2013 and demonstrate as an example. Let's start with the January file. If we wanted to create a chart, we could do that, highlight the data, create a chart. If instead what we wanted is a little sparkline, perhaps here in this cell, let's widen it so it would be quite a long sparkline, have a little mini graph here that shows me how this data looks. A little mini graph here, a little mini graph here, how that data looks. And then for the West, another little mini graph. Well, those are sparklines. Now to insert sparklines, you don't actually need to highlight anything to start with, but if we do highlight where we would like the sparklines to go, it will make one little step easier in the sparkline process. We then go to the insert ribbon, come along to sparklines. It has its own little section. There are 3 different types of sparkline graph. There's a line, that's a straightforward line that you would get in a line chart. There are columns, so again like a column chart, And then there's a win-loss, which effectively is a column but has the ability to show negative numbers around the 0 axis. Let's start with a line sparkline. So I'd like a sparkline that is a line. Now I need to tell it where the data is. I also need to tell it where to put the sparklines. And because I highlighted these 4 cells here, the assumption is these 4 cells is where you would like the sparklines to go, and that is already pre-entered. If I'd highlighted nothing, then I would need to go and enter this range as well. I do need to enter the data range, so I click in and then click and highlight my data, which is north, south, east and west, and then each of the types of transportation that we have sold. That's B3 to H6, and the sparklines will go into J3 to J6. Okay, and the sparklines appear. So these are relative representations of the value within each cell. With the sparkline selected, I get the Sparkline Tools Design Sensitive ribbon, which will allow me perhaps to put markers on so I can see where each of the points are. I've got a start, so I can see 245 is that one, then 34, then 345, then 656, then 967, then 1278, then 1589. So pretty much on all of these, there is a gradient upwards in the values. Now the sparklines, like normal charts, respond to changes in the data. So if I go into here and make a massive dent in the helicopter cells for the east, that then adjusts the sparkline, and you can see that that little peak dropped down. Do the same here for the horses in the west. Let's go right down to 234, and you can see again there's a little dent in the sparkline, a little mini chart. So with the sparkline selected, we get the context sensitive ribbon. In here we can make the changes. We already added markers. We could add the last point and the first point if we didn't want markers. With the markers on, you can't see the difference between the first and last. The first and last would work without the markers. We could actually ask it to highlight the high point without the markers because it's actually at the end of all of them, and the low point, which is consequently the second value in all of them. But if we again adjust, let's go to 460, that then is no longer the lowest point. This point here is. Back into the sparklines. We can adjust the style. There's different colors up here. I could have a different color line. I could have a different color line with a different point. I can customize the sparkline color myself. So if one of the pre-built styles is not what I'm after, I might want an orange line. And I can customize the marker color. So we have different markers. The default marker color, the high point marker, the low point marker, the first point, the last point. If I change all my markers to red, then we get some red markers, but the high and the low remain as the default blue. I can also control the axis. Here it's set to automatic for each sparkline. Within a sparkline, it decides on how to spread these out based on the lowest and the highest value. If we say the axis must be the same for all sparklines, then the scale must be the same. So if you're trying to compare sparkline to sparkline for a set of data, then really you ought to change that so it is the same for all sparklines, and the same for the maximum value as well. So now you can compare these sparklines to each other for relative sales without them being effectively linked to each other. So I'd make them go back to automatic for each sparkline. Then the line is relative, only within its own values. So here we have some values. If we made them really quite small, then within itself, the graph can be used to compare. We say, oh, the high point is there, which is the fourth one, 1, 2, 3, 4, helicopters sold. But you couldn't compare that line to that line because the values are so much lower. But if we went into design and said, actually, it needs to be the same for all sparklines, then you can see that that top sparkline is pretty much flat because the values are so low compared to the other values. It all depends on how you're using the sparkline, whether you want it to be just a graphical representation of the values in that particular range, or whether you need them to be compared to each other. We can also change the sparkline to one of the other two types. So we have a column and we have a win-loss. Now all of the values here are positive, so they're all effectively above the 0 line. The column one looks quite good. Again, it retains what you've ticked in here. I've got high point ticked and low point ticked. If I take those off, then there's no differential between the colors of each of the columns. That's introduced you to sparklines, and you can see their use. Nice and pretty inline graphs, really, allowing you to quickly compare values in a row or even in a column. There wouldn't be nothing to stop us doing this along here. Insert sparklines. That's my data. Okay. And then you get a little mini graph that compares the values vertically. So that graph represents those 4 values there. Stick the markers on and you can see there are 4 values marked on. Clever little graphs, very easy to get, and with a bit of customization can help add that graphical appearance to your numbers. Once you've turned part of an Excel sheet into a table, we can then customize that table by using the table styles. We simply click into the table Tools Design ribbon. That is only there because we have table and we're inside that table. And we'll see here that we can turn on different bits of the style bits that we do or do not want. So header row is activated, total row is activated, banded rows are activated. First column is not, but it can be. Last column is not, but it can be. And banded columns, if you really want to, go the whole hog. I'm going to leave banded columns off. Having selected what we want from our styles, we then choose our styles from the list. Choices of light styles, medium styles, and dark styles. Notice how font inverts here on the dark styles so that you get white text on a darker background. Or we can clear the styles completely so that we get a blank table. Now font for the text there needs to be reverted to automatic. Now, if you're not happy with any of the styles that are actually given to you, you can create your own style by going to New Table Style. In the New Table Style dialog box, we firstly need to give our table a name, Guys Table. And then we can customize each of the elements. So the first column stripe, how wide is it? The first column, second column, third column, use all of those. Second column stripe, first row stripe, second row stripe. So these are the bits of your table that you can control. We can customize any element we like. This is our table as a preview. So for example, let's say the whole table and choose format. What would we like to control in the whole table? Well, I'd like to control the fact that the borders are all dotted, the outline border and the inside border. Okay, and you can just about see that on the preview. What about the first row stripe format? Well, the first row background, I'd like to be sort of light yellow. Okay. Second row stripe format, I'd like to be a darker yellow. Okay. Now the elements that you've been formatting then go bold. So you can see just by looking at this table grid here, which parts you have controlled. Let's do the header row. Keeping with the yellow theme, let's make that a dark color background, but change the font color to white. Okay. I've only changed a few elements and then we'll see what that looks like. So that's okay. That then appears in the list as a custom style and I can apply that by clicking on it. You can see that that gets applied. Dark background, lighter, a bit darker, lighter, a bit darker for my stripes, my banded rows. Now if I need to edit Guys Table, I go back to the list, right click here, and I can choose Modify. And then I can go in and perhaps control the total row format. Background color quite dark, white font. Why don't we make it bold as well? Okay. And the total row goes bold. Okay. And then that gets applied to my grid. So that's the ability to create your own table style. From the table styles drop list, new table style, and then you go ahead and create it. Once you have a table style, it then appears under this custom list where you can right click and you'll see that you can choose to apply and clear current formatting or apply and maintain any formatting already in place, modify the custom style, duplicate it, therefore have a second style that you can modify slightly differently, delete it, and even add it to the quick access toolbar. So it would appear up here, and then you could just choose it very, very quickly without having to go into Table Tools, Design, and choose the style. So that just takes your tables a little bit further. Tables are part of an Excel spreadsheet that you've decided to format separately and maintain it separately. It gives you this extra ability of filtering the columns. And you'll find also with the total row, it gives you the ability to change the function at any stage by choosing the drop down in each of the individual cells in the total row, as well as this extra ability to create your own table style and then use that from henceforth. So now that I have my own style, I can go to February, where I have a table, choose the drop down, choose my style, which is at the top, and apply. And the same for March, which is also a table. Notice I'm not having to highlight it, I just click into the table, choose my style and apply, and it's fantastic style. Obviously I can modify that should I decide not to like the style. Sometimes when you're in Excel, what you want to do is experiment with some of the numbers that you have. So sort of running what if scenarios, what if this, what if that? Well, that's possible. You can build a sheet as we've done here, which is called shopping list, which actually has two sheets within it. Shopping, which is a little mini shopping list, and then MPG for miles per gallon, which is working out the cost per week for running a particular car. Now within those two sheets, we could experiment with some numbers. So what would happen if we could manage to get our milk for a little bit less? If we managed to get the milk for 99 cents rather than 101, what happens to our total shopping bill down here? Let's just embolden that so we can see the changes. Now instead of doing these what if sample tests ourselves, we could use some of the tools provided by Excel. Now the one tool we want to have a look at now is the Goal Seek tool. If you go to the Data ribbon, What If, you'll find the Goal Seek option. Now what this does is it allows you to set a set value, so set a specific value for a specific cell. So here it's selected D9 because that is the one I was on when I went to the tool. So if I want to set the value of D9, which is our total bill, to be $30, so that's the maximum amount I can spend this week by changing one other cell. Now, if I only have $30 and it's currently 32, obviously something needs to be reduced. So let's reduce quantity of apples. So I'm setting the value of one cell, and that cell will be the result of a formula or a number of formulas by changing a cell that isn't a formula. It cannot change, for example, the total here because that's a formula, but it could change the price or it could change the quantity. So what I'm asking to do is see if we can get to $30 maximum by adjusting the quantity of apples that we buy. Okay. You saw that very quickly. It ran through a number of options and it managed to achieve what we were after and said, yep, we've met the target of 30, which is showing $30 because of the formatting, by giving the result of 2.482759 apples. Now, obviously in the real world, you can't buy that proportion of an apple, but it gets us to our target. We could then go, okay, thank you for working that out. Let's actually just buy 2. And we've achieved our aim of spending $30 maximum because that's what I've got in my pocket. So you select the cell, go to What If on the Data ribbon, and then Goal Seek. If I wanted to change that to, let's say we have 50, by changing the cell, well, let's go for chocolate. If I've got $50, once we've bought our necessities, I want to spend the extra on chocolate. So let's get Excel to figure out how much chocolate we could buy if we've got $50. Okay. It ran through some options. It's actually achieved the 50, and we can get that by buying 9.829431 bars of chocolate. In the real world, we would need to go back, change that to 9, and then we would have 47.52. And we think, actually, we've still got 252. We can't afford another bar of chocolate, but we could get some more apples. So let's go add another Goal Seek. What If Goal Seek? Set that to 50 still, but we can change the quantity of apples. So it would be a little bit more healthy that way. Okay, gets to 50. It's not a full amount, it's 4.8. So we need to go change that to 4. So we can use the Goal Seek tool by selecting a cell that is a formula, putting in a fixed value we want that cell to reach, and then allow it to change one other cell to make that solution. We can do the same with our MPG. Here we have a set car. It has a miles per gallon. We know how much it costs per gallon, and this is how many miles we do in a week. Therefore, it works out that the spend per week is $110. Now, if we wanted to keep that to 100, we could run a what if analysis. Goal Seek. Okay, I want to set cell to 100 by changing. Well, I can't change the MPG, that's the car's MPG, but I could change dollars per gallon and see what we need to do as far as shopping around is concerned. I'll say, okay, comes to 5. So I need to shop around and spend no more than $5 on fuel, and I will be able to do my 500 miles per week at $100. Okay, let's undo, because we can undo Goal Seek solutions and run a slightly different option. It's still going to be targeting 100. This time we're going to change the miles per week. Okay, and it comes down to 454.5455. So if I want to keep my fuel bill down to $100, I would need to restrict my mileage to 454.5 miles. Therefore, I need to look at my journeys and see if I can shave out 45.5 miles. All the goal seek has helped me do there is give me some options. I don't want to spend more than 100. Tell me what difference that would make in the dollar per gallon, or tell me what difference that would make in how many miles I can cover. And then I would need to do some planning for my week to save those miles. That's Goal Seek, a useful little tool for helping with what-if testing and running options. Now, although we can use Excel for time, and it's very good at managing time, there are sometimes a couple of little hiccups that are worth noting and seeing how we can deal with them. If we had time, could we find the difference in a start time and an end time, therefore to give us a duration? Yes, we can. As long as we give Excel the time in Excel's time format so it understands what kind of time we're dealing with. If we take the time working file, for example, we have a sheet called difference, and we can enter a start time. The times must be entered in hours, minutes, and seconds. Now you can leave the seconds off and it will assume 0, but you can't leave the hours and the minutes off. So we need to put 11:00 for 11 hours. No minutes. The seconds will be assumed. When we tab through and come back, you'll see it assumes 11 AM. So the seconds are assumed as 0. And then our end time could be 12:34. Again, we're going to assume the seconds are 0, tab through, and that's 12:34 PM. If we want to do a time in the afternoon, it is easier to use a 24-hour clock because then Excel knows you're dealing with afternoon time. So we would do 15:15 as an example for 3:15. And you can see in the bar at the top, it says 3:15 PM. Now we could have typed 3:15 and added the PM ourselves. Just personally prefer to enter 24 hours and let Excel do the conversion between AM and PM. And we carried on through until 17:15, which is 5:15 PM. So having entered these two start and end times, how could we work out duration between them? As simple as taking away one from the other. So equals the higher time, so the later time, take away the start time. Gives me a duration of 1 hour, 34 minutes. And the same here, equals the end time, take away start time, exactly 2 hours. Now, if you wanted to work in seconds, perhaps because you were dealing with people's run times and things, then we could do that. In that case, we would need to make sure we entered a 0 as the hour element. 0, 2 minutes, 24 seconds. And the end time is 0 hours, 3 minutes, 28 seconds. We can then replicate our formula down. And because we've copied from there to there, it's copied the formatting, and the formatting does not include the seconds, because here it assumed it didn't need them. So when we copy down, it says, well, you didn't need them before, you don't need them now. However, I need to see the seconds. So I would need to change the formatting by going to the number section, extending the number section, and coming down. You see here it says only hours and minutes. Let's see the seconds as well. Okay. And then we see the exact difference. 1 minute and 4 seconds. So we can do duration. For the higher time, take away the lower time, and it will work with the hours, it will work with the minutes, and it will work with the seconds. Not a problem. It can understand each of those. The problem comes from you and Excel's interpretation. So here we didn't add the seconds, so it said, okay, you're not interested in them. And in the result, it said you're not interested in them. Here we did add the seconds, but in order to do that, we had to provide a 0 for the hour element. Same here. And in the answer, we had to then reformat the cell because we copied it from above, where it already made the assumption you didn't want to see the seconds. So that's just a formatting issue. That's the straightforward bit covered. What about the difference in time when we go through midnight? So say, for example, we want to go from, say, 4 PM on one day to 8 AM on the next. What's the difference in time there? Let's come down a little bit and have the start time. Let's look at July the 1st, 2013, 1800. Need to widen to see the time. That's quite happily understanding that. Let's just widen this one already. And we're going to go through to July the 2nd, 2013, 8 AM, 800. So Excel's assuming those and quite happy. We can do the takeaway. 8 AM on July the 2nd, takeaway 6 PM on July the 1st, and I get a return of 0.583333. So that's the proportion of a day, 0.5833 of a day. But I'd actually like to see that in hours, so we need to format that as time. Now if I choose the little drop down and say, show me that as time, please, it shows me it as 2 PM. So on a 24-hour clock, that's actually 14 hours. And if you work this out in your head, it is 14 hours. But how do I get this to show 14 hours rather than 2 PM? because it's not a time, it's a duration. Well, I need to go into the extra little pop out again, into custom, and come down to where it's showing me HMMs and SSs. There we are, hours, minutes and seconds. Okay, and I'm showing that as 14 hours, no minutes and no seconds. Now that I've actually set that up, if I change this, let's say 8:15, it then understands I'm now wanting to see hours, minutes and seconds, and it says actually that's 14 hours and 50 minutes gap between there and there. So we can do takeaways effectively on time, even when those times are on different days. We just need to again watch the formatting. The other little bit that needs a slight adjustment on the formatting is when you try to do cumulative time. So if we come into here, we've got some start and end times already entered for you, and then the difference. Now if we highlight all of those differences, down the status bar it says sum 28 hours, 4 minutes and no seconds. However, if we try to sum in here using an Excel sum function, it only gives me 4 hours and 4 minutes. That's because we've added the time up and it's effectively ignoring the full days. So it's ignoring the 24 hours and giving me the 4 hours remainder. If I highlight that, we can see it's 28:04, take off the 24 hours for a day, and I'm left with 4:04. If you need to see cumulative hours, then again you need to control and change the formatting. So we go into the little pop out, come down to the number options, and in this number list of choices, you're actually looking for H with a little square bracket around it. And when I choose that, you'll see in the sample, if you watch the sample there, that changes to 28 hours, 4 minutes and no seconds. That's the one you want, the little H in square brackets, to effectively show cumulative hours rather than the hour of the day. So therefore it's not taking out all the full days. So it would take out 24, if it went past 48, it would take the 48 off and it would just leave as the remainder. With the H, it shows the cumulative. So then I will get to see what I've added up here, which is 28 hours and 4 minutes. So that's a couple of clever little bits with time. The difference between time, how you can control that when it goes over a day, and how you can do cumulative time when it's more than 24 hours. If you wanted to calculate mortgage repayments over a number of years, 15, 20, 25, that could involve quite a few lines of Excel, where you take your initial value and you work out how much you would have to repay each month, how much interest gets added each month, how much you have to repay each month, how much interest gets added each month. So if that was over 20 years, for example, that would be 20 times 12. So it would be 240 lines of Excel to work out how much you pay each month, how much interest is added, how much you pay each month, how much interest is added. And then you would be able to figure out how much you have to pay each month. Luckily, Excel has a function to do all of that work for you. It's called PMT, for payment. So here in our example, which is called mortgage, we have the house value, the amount borrowed. We have a clever little one value divided by the other here to work out your loan to value, the interest rate, and the number of years to repay. So these four values are entered in yourself. What we would like to do then is for the monthly repayment to be calculated for us. Well, the start point is equals, like all functions, PMT, which stands for payment. Open brackets. What is the interest rate? Well, it's this one here. However, that's the interest rate per year, and we're looking at monthly payments. So we need to divide that by 12, comma, N per, the number of payments. Well, we have here the number of years, but we're again dealing in months, so we need to multiply that by 12 to get the number of payments. So we take the cell value, multiply by 12, comma. What's the amount that we're borrowing? PV standing for present value. Well, the present value is 350,000. That's how much we borrowed today. The next two parameters are optional and we don't need them. The future value is where do we want to get to? We'll want to get to 0, but that's the default. And then the type just controls whether the interest is charged at the beginning or the end of the period. So the beginning or the end of the month. The default is the beginning, and really over a 25-year period, it will make a difference, but not a massive amount of difference. So this is our function, close brackets. So it takes our interest rate and divides it by 12 to turn that into a monthly interest rate. And then it multiplies our number of years for our loan by 12 to get how many months it will last. And then B2 is the value we are borrowing. When I press return, it then says it will cost me $1,752.18 each month. Now that I have this in place, I can experiment with the other values. What would happen if I borrowed a little less? Then the amount per month will go down. What if the interest rate was even lower? Then again the amount per month would go down. if I'm paying less each month, perhaps I could start to look at paying this over a lesser period. So let's say 20 years. And the monthly amount goes up because I'm obviously having to cover the amount in a much shorter period of time. Perhaps I could try and pay this off in 15 years. And I'm looking at another $300 per month on top of my previous amount. So that's the PMT function. Very clever, just requiring those three numbers: the interest rate, the number of payments, and the actual value. Now we can make our little mortgage calculator a little cleverer by doing something with the LTV. Over on the right, you may have noticed a little table here. In this little table, we have a number of LTVs, the loan to values. If you have a higher loan to value, then your interest rate goes up because you're of a bigger risk to the mortgage company. The lower the LTV, the better interest rate you will get. So we need to make use of this little table in our interest rate cell here. Instead of entering the interest rate, we can experiment with the interest rate by looking at different amounts borrowed against the house value. So in here, I need to do a V lookup. I need to look up the LTV percentage here. Now the actual value in that cell is not 50%, it's 0.5, whereas my table contains full integers. So what I need to do to my C2 is actually multiply it by 100 to turn it into full integer value, comma. I then need to take that new value, which will now be 50 at the moment, across to my little table here. So I highlight the table, comma. Having arrived at that table, I need the value that is currently stored in the second column. So I put a 2, comma, and then the range lookup needs to be true in this case. It cannot be false because I won't be able to find an exact match all the time. If the LTV, for example, is 54, 54 does not exist in this table and we would not get a match. So we need to go true, have an approximate match. And then I can close my brackets, return, and it says at an LTV of 50%, which is there, I will have to pay 2.8 interest. If I need to borrow more, my LTV goes up to 88 and we come into our table and 88 falls into this bracket here between 85 and 100. If I need to borrow the whole value of the house, LTV becomes 100 and 100 is 5%. And my monthly repayment really shoots up, in which case I would need to push back out to 25 years. So we can experiment just with a little set of formulas. One, to calculate the LTV, loan to value. One then looks up loan to value in our little table over here, provided by the mortgage company. And then the PMT uses the years, which we can experiment with, the interest rate, which is driven by the LTV, and the amount we're going to borrow to see what the monthly repayment is. So that's the PMT function for calculating monthly repayment on an amount borrowed over a particular period with a set interest rate, all of which we can adjust the variables for and get a different return on the payment due. We've seen how formulas and functions can use values from other worksheets, not just the worksheet that they currently exist in. We're going to take that idea one step further and look at 3D referencing. If we take the sales data sheet 2013, you'll see that we have some data for January, February, March, etc. And then we have QTR1 and QTR2 further down the line. What we would like in the QTR1, so the first quarter, is the summary of cars sold broken down by each region for each of the 3 months. So we start here knowing what we know, which is to put an equals sign, the sheet we would like, the cell we would like. Now previously we've pressed return, but we're actually going to go with a plus because I want to add on another cell, and that cell is February, cars sold for the north. Then another plus, March. Now you can see the formula building at the top here, Jan exclamation mark B3 plus Feb exclamation mark B3 plus March exclamation mark B3. That's all the ones I want, so I press return. And that brings me back, and we have 735 cars sold. Now the idea behind 3D referencing is to actually make this formula a lot shorter than it currently is. The only way that 3D referencing works though is if the sheets you are effectively trying to add up must be made up in exactly the same way. So they must be identical. So if we want to add up Jan, Feb, March using the 3D referencing idea, then the sheets must be the same. And effectively we know they're laid out the same, and we're trying to add here the same cell, B3, from each of those sheets. So what I could do is replace this formula with an equals sum, because I want to add up. I need to keep the January, but I don't need the B3 and I don't need the February. But what I need is a colon. I don't need that exclamation mark, but I do need the last one. And then I keep B3. Now let me close the brackets just to show the formula is complete, and have a look in the formula bar here. It's equals sum, so that's our function we would like to add up. Open brackets. Go from January to March, that's why the colon is there. Exclamation mark tells it that Jan and March are actually sheet names. And then we'd like B3 from each of the sheets that exist between January and March inclusive. Now, there are only 3 months, so there's only February in between. But it doesn't matter how many sheets are in between Jan and March. They will get picked up as long as when you place them effectively on top of each other, B3 is, in our case, the number of cars sold for the North. So when I press return, we should find the same answer, 735. And hey presto, we do. So the logic there is equals the function, so whatever we're trying to do, open brackets, the first sheet name, colon, the last sheet name, exclamation mark, just to tell Excel we're dealing with sheet names, and then the cell or cells, because you can select a range in this way, that you would like to add up. Now, because everything is relative, I can take that formula and drag it down to the west, and I get cars sold for the south. You see it's moved to B4, and if we look at the west, we can see it's moved to B6. So happily dealing relatively, I can then take those cells and drag them to the right. But just before we do that, you'll have noticed that our formatting has gone awry here, because we've copied this cell here, which has got the formula in fine, but it's also got a bold solid line at the top of it. So now the ones below it have. So let's just do undo to take us back. This time when we drag down, I'm going to drag, but with the right mouse button. And when I let go, I've got an option to fill without formatting. That way it'll keep the formatting of the destination cells. So fill without formatting, I get the same results, but I retain my dot dash blue line. I can then take these 4 cell formulas and drag them across to get the plane sold and the bike sold totals. Again, I'm going to drag them with the right mouse button. So we go down to the fill handle, but with the left. We see we get this little black cross, and at that point you click the right, and you'll notice that the cursor changes shape. Don't be perturbed, keep going, drag and drag, let go, and fill without formatting again. So the right click and drag is giving me this choice menu. That retains my formatting, but brings the formula across, so that's now selecting from January to March, C4, and C4 is my plane sold in the south. So that's 3D referencing. We're going to look at one more little example, which has more sheets in its range. If we look at sales data 2015 in your working folder, you'll see we have a sales summary sheet that is looking to do the same thing. Add up the car sold, plane sold, bike sold, but not just for a quarter now, for the whole year. So I could start here and do equal sum, open brackets, Jan, colon, dec, assuming the last sheet is called dec, or I'm going to show you an alternative method of selecting those sheets. So we still start equals sum. I want to add these cells up, open brackets. I then click on the first sheet in the range, bring in the last sheet into view and do a shift click on the last sheet. And you'll see in the formula bar how my formula is now building, Jan, colon, dec, exclamation mark. These single apostrophes that Excel has placed there are only required if there are any spaces in your sheet name. But because we've used the mouse to pick up the sheets, Excel's placed them in for me. And then I click on the cell that I want, which happens to be B3, and then return. We visit the formula, and we can see it's picked up Jan, colon, dec, exclamation mark, B3. No need for the apostrophes, but you will need them if your sheet names have spaces in them. Logically, everything's in the same relative position. Notice that the result isn't, although I'm asking for January to dec B3, the result is going into C2. So it doesn't matter where the result goes. What matters with 3D referencing is that the cells you are trying to add up are all in the same place. So the sheets January to December must be identical. Obviously the values differ, but the layout must be identical. We now know that that is the correct formula, and everything's now in the same relative position. So I can take that cell there, do copy rather than drag, so that I can highlight all of the cells in one go and paste. So we go to paste, click the little drop down, and we are given our paste options. Let's choose paste special, and we see we have over here the option for formulas and number formats. Okay, and that retains the number formatting, whatever that might have been, so the decimal places, any currency symbols, etc. But none of the other formatting is replaced, so none of the dots and dashes. So that's 3D referencing. Remember that the cells that you're selecting must be identical on each sheet. If you've got that in place, then there is no restriction on the number of sheets that you can actually pick up in that range in a 3D reference. The first sheet, colon, the last sheet, exclamation mark, the cell or cells you then require. The way that absolute referencing works is that you won't know you need it until you need it. Now, so far, we've seen formulas and we've been able to copy and paste those formulas because Access works in a relative way. But there will be occasions when the relativeness actually works against you. Let's take the absolute file in your working folder. We have a sheet called Retail Sales, which has a number of sales for 8 shops for 7 days of the week. First thing we need to do is to actually add up all of the sales. So we highlight all of the values and the total rows and column and use our auto sum key, and it puts the results in. We then need to work out our profit for each of the shops. Now over to the right here, we can see our profit margin is 32.5%. So we simply go into shop 1 equals total for shop 1 multiplied by L2, which contains our profit margin. And when we press return, we've actually made $63,537 physical dollars profit from shop 1. Now we have a formula in place. We want the second cell here to work out for shop 2, for shop 3, shop 4. So we simply take that formula and replicate all the way across to the total column, and that will work out our total profit. For some reason, things don't work. Let's check on shop 3's formula. It has quite happily moved along relatively and now looks at shop 3's total, but unfortunately, the cell looking at the profit margin also moved relatively. So we're now 2 along. So we're looking at N2. Now there is a way around this. We could repeat the profit margin against each of the cells that we will end up in. For example, when we get to the total, although we're looking at the total sum, we're actually looking at T2 to try and find out the profit margin percentage. So I would need to replicate 32.5% all the way from L2 to T2. Or we introduce absoluteness. Now what absoluteness allows you to do is in a formula that you know you're going to copy, so this one here, is actually make a cell, a range, a number of cells absolute, so that when they're copied and pasted, they can't actually change. So I do want the B9 to change. As I replicate this formula across here, I want the B9 to go across and go C9, D9, E9. But what I don't want is I don't want the L2 to change. So what I do is I put a set of dollars, and those dollars go before the column letter and before the row number. And what that does is it fixes the column and the row for that cell reference, so it cannot change regardless of where I paste it. Now, if you're not actually ever going to copy and paste a formula, then you don't need to use dollars. This only applies to formulas that you know you're going to copy and paste, and you need to retain the absolute reference. So having entered my dollars, we can then take that formula and replicate it across to the totals. And you'll see we now have values in, and if we check any one, for example, shop 8, it's looking at the right total because the column in row 9 has been moving as we've been moving, but it's still looking at that L2 because we fixed the reference to it, $L, $2. Now it gets a little bit more complicated if you want to copy a formula and only fix the row reference or only fix the column reference, so that as you copy and paste it, it can't move the row, but it can move the column, or it can't move the column, but it can move the row. And that's done by just changing where the dollars go. So you might say, let's call it L $2. So the L can change, but the 2 can't. Now in our case, we actually could have got away with $L 2. So it's always going to look at row 2, but it can't change the column letter. And as we're only copying and pasting it horizontally, that's great because we don't want it to change the column letter. But if we were to go downwards with it, it would allow the 2 to change to a 3, and then to a 4, etc. Now when entering the dollars, there's actually a little keyboard shortcut that will do it for you. If I click into a formula, so let's go back to the original, and it's this one that you would make absolute before you then copy it. Let's remove the dollars and assume that we want to add dollars. So I click into the L2 and then I use F4 on the keyboard. And what you'll see happen is the first time you press F4, it gets a double absoluteness. So it goes $L, $2. I do it again and I just get the row number dollared. So it becomes L, $2. I do it again. I get $L2. And then I do it again and I end up with no dollars. So the first case is totally absolute, double dollars. And that's F4 when you're actually in the formula. And then you can replicate across. So if we go into the shopping sheet, we can see this in action again. This time we're going vertically. Here we have a shopping list, number of items, how much of each item have we bought, how much is the unit price of each item, and then a formula to calculate the subtotal. So that's quantity times price. There is then a formula calculating the grand total, which is actually the subtotal plus the tax. And it's the tax that we need to calculate. Our value for tax is over here. There's 20% tax to add on to all our purchases. So we do the first one, which is bread, equals subtotal for the bread multiplied by the tax percentage cell, J5, and return, and we see we have to pay $0.8 in tax. Now we already know that we could copy and paste that down, and we already know, because we're using a fixed cell over here, that if I were to do that, I get zeros all the way down because of the cell reference changing. Again, quite happily, as before, it's changed the reference to the left-hand cell, so it's looking at the new row, but it's also changed the reference to the tax cell, and it's moved down. So however many cells we've moved down, it's moved the reference down. So we do the same, we go back to the first cell, so the first one we've done with the formula, we click anywhere around the J5, and we can use the keyboard shortcut of F4 to place the dollars in. You can just type the dollars if you can't remember the keyboard shortcut, but the keyboard shortcut is quick and easy. So that then becomes $J, $5, and it's that formula with the absolute references that I then copy down. And we see we have correct values then for the tax, because it's changed the row reference on the left to the new row, but it's kept it absolute. So it's always looking at this tax cell. So if the tax changes, so it goes up to 25%. When we press return, that 25% feeds in to all the tax values, which then feeds in to higher grand totals. So that's absolute referencing, the use of dollars in a formula referencing a cell to keep that reference the same when you copy and paste that formula. When you've slaved for hours building an Excel worksheet to look good and its calculations to work well, the last thing you want is for someone to come along and to accidentally wipe out some of that hard work. So if I'm looking at sales data 2013, I'm in the January sheet, I inadvertently click on the total for January cars sold. I could press delete on the keyboard and I've lost a formula. Now if I notice I've done it, I can undo and the formula will come back. If I don't notice and it's sometime down the line, then that formula is gone and I've got to go through the process of building that again. So there are times when you wish to protect worksheets. Now in order to protect this January worksheet, I simply go to the Review ribbon and there's an option there to protect the sheet. So I give that a single click and then I have the option to add a password in. Now the password I would suggest is only recommended if the sheet is going to be shared with other people and you really don't want them to be changing anything. If it's just to stop yourself from accidentally breaking things, then I would recommend not having a password. Otherwise you'll have to enter it twice now as proof that you know it, and then enter it when you try and unprotect the sheet. So we'll leave it without a password. What we can then allow is things that we will let people do. So we will let them select lock cells, we'll let them select unlock cells. Now we'll look at the difference between locked and unlocked cells. Subsequently, we could let them format cells or format columns or format rows, insert columns, insert rows, etc. So there's quite a list of things that you will allow them to do. By default, if the tick's not there, they cannot do it. So let's leave the tick in insert columns, but not in insert rows. When I then click OK, this sheet, and only this sheet, this will only apply to January, not February, March and April, is now protected. And if I try to click and highlight, I can do that because I've allowed them to select cells. But if I try and actually make a change, I get an error message. It says the cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. If you want to make changes, then you'll need to unprotect the sheet. You might need a password. Luckily, we haven't set one. However, the things I have let them do, which is the selection, and I've let them insert a column. So I could try insert column, and it quite happily lets them do that. But if they try to insert a row, the option is grayed out. So the things that they cannot do are effectively disabled. So if I go D and try and delete that column, I can't, because I haven't enabled that as an option. If I then wish to unprotect the sheet so that I can go and do things, then I simply click Unprotect Sheet. And I'm back in and able to do everything. So I can get rid of that column. If we add the password, Protect Sheet, take that option out for Insert Columns this time, and we'll put a password on. We're then asked to confirm that password. And still, we cannot get in, make any changes, but we can select cells. If I then come to Unprotect Sheet, I need to know the password. And OK, and we'll be in, but if I put the wrong password on, password you supplied is not correct. So you need to know the right password. And the sheet is then unprotected. So the idea behind this protection for a sheet is effectively to not allow them in. The sheet protection is per sheet. So if you want to protect February, you would need to go into February and click Protect Sheet. OK, if you want to protect March, you need to go March, Protect Sheet. OK. Now you'll notice that when you do protect a sheet, a lot of options, if we click back at the Home option there, are grayed out. So those are things you cannot do with the sheet protected. Come back and unprotect the sheet, and those options on the Home ribbon are returned. We're going to take a different file now to look at trend lines in Excel. This file is the ice cream sales file. It's available in your working folder. A single sheet of data, which is 12 months of the year with 12 sets of sales of ice creams. And then the chart is in its own sheet. Now a trend line is there to show a pattern of values. Now to add a trend line to your chart, you can do this as we have here, where the chart is the whole sheet, or where the chart is an object. As long as you have the Chart Tools ribbon activated and the Design sub-ribbon. Over on the left here we have Add Chart Element. One click gives you a set of choices, and we can come down to trend line. Now none means no trend line, and that's where we are at the moment, or we can have a linear trend line, and you can see that as we hover the line appears. Exponential trend line, a linear forecast, and you see the graph gets extended because it's forecasting into the future as to where the sales will go, or a moving average, and you can see this has a line that goes along with our data. So depending on the type of trend line you're after, you would choose one of the main four choices. So let's choose a linear. It's a straightforward straight line, and that takes our sales and sort of works out an average and forecast across here to create our trend line. Now you can change the trend line at any stage by going to Add Chart Element, Trend Line, and choosing one of the other types, or we can go into further options. Here we have more trend line options, which opens a little dialog box on the right here, where we can see our main trend line options. So exponential, linear, logarithmic, polynomial, power, moving average. Now the moving average, you can control how many periods of sales it looks at to create that average. The default is 2. So you can see that the moving average trend line actually starts in February because it needs the first 2 months to work out what the average is. Or we can increase that period. So if I increase it to 3, it doesn't start until March. 4, it doesn't start until April. But it's then averaging the sales across 4 months to work out the actual trend line there. And the trend line name there is 4 per move average sales, or we can give it our own name, T1. And then the rest of that is grayed out. It depends on really the choice of trend line. So if I'm happy with the moving average one, I can close the trend line box, and you can see it leaves the moving average in place as well as my original linear trend line, should I need to use them for comparison. So the idea behind a trend line is it looks at your data and produces a trend based on the type of trend line that you decide upon. So whether it's a linear one, which is invariably a straight line with some kind of angle depending on the sales, and then your other types, polynomial, exponential, and the moving average one.